Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel today for CRPA's first ever live stream. We are so excited to be with you. First and foremost, before we start anything, it is currently 6 p.m. in California. The polls are open until 8 p.m. If you have not voted yet, I cannot encourage you enough. We will be here when you come back. Go ahead, go and cast your vote, because today starts that race until November. Why are we here and who am I with? I am here with Rick Travis. He is the legislative director for the California Rifle and Pistol Association. We kind of got to talking with each other. I would have been at home tonight just sort of watching these vote tallies roll in. Rick was going to be doing the same, so we thought, why not create a session here where we can kind of all go through it together. Of course, the emphasis is on Second Amendment advocacy here in California. We will be having a stream of the national results coming in, but mostly we will be talking about what's going on here in California and that road to November. So, Rick, thank you very much for coming to hang out.
My pleasure. It's going to be a fun night.
Absolutely. So I guess, with 2 hours until the polls actually close and we start getting some of this data in, maybe what we could talk about is kind of what's at stake here in California. CRPA has a lot of litigation going. Maybe we could talk about that. There's a lot of legislation rolling through, some after effects that we're still feeling from legislation that was passed last year and the year prior. That we're still seeing unfold. But let's kind of just start with litigation. We have a couple of really important lawsuits that are on legislation from last year. The one that I'm thinking of is the May v. Bonta lawsuit. How do we see this going forward?
I think we're going to continue to watch May v. Bonta move in the direction through the courts. I don't think anything's really going to break loose, as you know, until the Supreme Court makes a decision on the Duncan case. I think a lot of things are being held in the Ninth Circuit because they want to know what the Supreme Court will do in Duncan. I think once you see the Supreme Court, which as long as nothing changes on that court, especially given some of their more recent decisions, I think that's going to come out very positive in Duncan, and we'll make that another landmark case that will be up there with Bruin and Heller and McDonald and Miller and a couple others. And as a result, I think you'll see a lot of these cases move very quickly. But I think what's important is, May v. Bonta is looking at that. You have also Bolin v. Bonta, which is looking at the roster. And part of what we're dealing with right now is trying to look, and we'll talk about more in depth tonight as we get into the politics of the state, but we've got a legislature that has been hijacked, literally, by the far left. And I want to point that out. There are some Democrats in the building that I work with on hunting policy, range policy, a lot of other things that are not part of the far left. As you know, Kevin, a lot of times they vote with us. Very strong supporters of the Second Amendment, the Constitution. And we have a couple of Republicans that aren't always showing up for votes. So there's good and bad in both. But I think right now the stranglehold is by these radicals who look at something like the roster and go, hey, I'm Anthony Portantino and I can do anything. So, if it's good to have a roster, why don't I get me and some of my friends to come up with another roster? And so that's what they're trying to do with gun safes. Like, you have to have an approved seal from DOJ. Last time I checked, the legislature nor DOJ knows anything about gun safes. But yet they're doing that, just like they don't know anything about handguns, and they've done that, and we're having to sue them. So there's definitely a battleground in here with these lawsuits as we look at them that, I just want to encourage people, we haven't lost this by a long shot. You and I have talked for the better part of a year after we had the Bruin decision that Bruin really was, in the national 2A battle, the equivalent of the Battle of Midway in the Pacific during World War II. The Japanese Empire knew it was over. They knew we had destroyed their Navy and their capability to win. But they made us bleed out on every island they could possibly think of. And we had to force them to surrender.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this legislature is doing.
Well, and I guess the legislature is a product of an election, right? Which, we're sitting here on Super Tuesday. Again, guys, we're going to be going over some of these results as they come in at 8 o'clock. But for now, I mean, you have litigation, which is a result of legislation, which is a result of elections. And I can't tell you how many videos I've created with you where it ultimately comes down to we got to get out there and vote. Why are people going out there and voting? What is the process? And, I also am curious to get your take. You're up there in the Capitol presenting information to our legislators so that they can be informed on bills that they sign or do not sign. What is the difference to you, and what should be the difference to me between a supermajority in California and a non-supermajority in California? I think, we all kind of have these ideas that we could take back California. That's not how the anti-Second Amendment people did it. They did it gradually over time. And now we kind of, are in the situation that we face. You kind of got to imagine it's got to be gradually over time. The first thing that comes in taking back this state is going from a supermajority to a non-supermajority. So what's the difference there for you as someone who's lobbying in the Capitol?
Well, I think there's a few. I think to go one step before that is, why are we here today? Like, this is so historic, and yes, it's historic that we're actually doing this kind of a live stream on a campaign primary day, but it's historic in the sense of California hasn't had a primary in March. We're normally in June.
Yeah.
And California moved it up, and a lot of people are like, okay, so they changed dates. A lot of people missed the whole point of this. This allowed for some game playing that is happening right now. Normally this time of the year, I would have been listening to this in Sacramento, because today would have been a day we testified in Sacramento. And, them trying to jam bills through, heading off until May, until they made their last final push for re-election or to get elected, depending on the situation, to a different office. But instead, literally, they shoved all these bills out and then put them on the desk, which is where they can't move, until, next week. Why? Because they're all running for election now. And people are like, okay, well, isn't that a good thing? No, it's not a good thing, because that shortened the calendar. So by putting a couple thousand bills up for grabs, they've made it near impossible. They've played all sorts of games in the Capitol, Kevin, where we had people that could call in because of what happened during COVID. And, let's not forget, we had a governor, we had the leaders of all these committees. I mean, Anthony Portantino multiple times sent up there, Senator Wahib sent up there going, aren't we wonderful? We're great Democrats. We're hearing the people's voice. We're not like the Trumpers and the Republicans and every other vile group outside of them that they could name off. And yet, Super Tuesday, we can't do anything until after Super Tuesday. Oh, call in? No. We're going back to pre-pandemic things. That was just a temporary thing. So evidently, listening to the people's voice was just temporary. And they cut everybody off. Like, nobody can do that unless you're physically there. You don't get to talk. And this is the example of a regime. And can it be changed? Yes. But it's like you said, it's getting good people to run for office, getting those people that in your neighborhoods and stuff to constantly complain and constantly say, well, if I was insert position, I would do this. But part of it comes down to that farm team. And one of the things that you and I've talked to people statewide is people are like, yeah, but a lot of where that farm team comes are nonpartisan offices like school boards. Well, it's not hard to figure out where someone relies on the Second Amendment. You could walk into any school board anywhere in California this week and say, hey, Utah, during public comment, Utah just passed a law this week that says teachers need to go get trained of how to use a firearm and have a CCW and carry it in the classroom to defend their students when evil appears. Now, if I'm looking at my panel when I do my 2 to 3 minutes of that, and I see 5 people go, oh no, how dare he say that? I can probably guess they're not going to side with me on the Second Amendment. This isn't hard to fish out. And then my group of friends know, okay, there's 7 people on this board and 5 of them freaked out over that statement. Then we have 5 people we need to find replacements for. And we do that through the process of voting. We fire them by not voting them in office and voting people that believe what we believe in the office.
And a tactic which has been used throughout the chapter program, taking aim, and by aim I mean really starting to look into some of these local candidates. There has been a ton of effort through the chapter program to actually vet these individuals and see what's going on. The one that comes to mind, honestly, is our Ventura chapter. I think they had 2 consecutive chapter meetings with candidate forums, a total of 32 candidates ranging from, state level all the way down to local level. It's great stuff, and it needs to continue, and the movement behind it needs to get stronger and more vast throughout the state if we are going to take it back. But back to my original question.
Well, and I want to say something too on that, Kevin, a little bit of back and forth. We have something unique this year that anybody who belongs to CRPA should be very, very excited. We have not one, but multiple members who are running for office tonight throughout the state of California. Many of them may end up in the final 2, moving into November, but that's not something that's happened historically, within the CRPA or gun owners of California and other groups. The fact that we have so many people in so many different areas of the state running for office, that is a huge testament to us not just preaching, hey, we need to get off our rear ends, we need to run campaigns, we need to do this. We're actually doing it. Just like we actually sue people when they mess up, just like we actually give testimony in the hallways, just like we actually decide not to do what's been done in the past and try new and innovative ways and are making ground with that. This is another area that, thanks to all the hard work you and your staff do, the support, what I do up in the Capitol, this is actually happening. And you're getting me some allies in some places, and I'm grateful.
Well, yeah, and it's probably long overdue, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we're definitely working on it now. Some of these programs that have become more prominent over the last few years certainly have some steam rolling behind them now. Again, you guys, if you are just tuning in, we've got Super Tuesday. We're just kind of hanging out. We're waiting for the polls to close at 8 o'clock. We're going to be talking about some stuff going on in the community. Want to take advantage of having our legislative director here with us. So thank you again, Rick, for being with us. But back to the legislature as a whole. What is the difference to you, and what should be the difference to me between having a supermajority in California and not, if any?
Well, the supermajority is able to close a lot of things out. There's plenty of political tricks, and I think people have to realize, there's politics start at the home. I mean, we all say it does. It does, and there's things that you don't say because you're trying to be political because there's something you want your spouse to agree with you on or your kids to agree with you on. Those games get even nastier in the Capitol, and so when you have a supermajority, you have the ability to not have to worry about, well, what if a couple of our Central Valley Democrats go against us? We could lose. Well, no, when you have that majority, but that majority is artificial in a sense, and that is if there were other options, which may result out of this election. We have a couple different third-party groups that are making a run for the presidency in November. I don't know if any of those are going to pan out, but just as an example, if one or more of those groups panned out, there's a good shot that you could have half a dozen to close to a dozen people throughout the state that are registered Democrat, that if their constituents voted for that third party, they would shift. That would break the supermajority right there. A lot of the places too before, there's some dynamics we can talk about, but whether you're for or against either of the 2 front runners in the Republican and Democrat is not what we're here to talk about tonight. Maybe in November we will. But tonight, what I really wanted people to focus on is looking at the things that those 2 campaigns are doing that have altered the political face, not just in California, but nationwide. And one of those areas that's being altered is the power of the incumbency. Before, you look at any kind of a area, district, or a political office, and I'll give props to the people at the Cook Report. They cut it as 50-50, 50% leans one way, 50% leans the other way. But then you get what's called a plus number. So if it's, 56% Democrat, say, then that would be a D plus 6. And you can figure out where those percentages are. Well, the adage had been coming into this election, if you were, a 4 or above on either side, probably not going to flip that seat.
Right.
But in 22, we saw several seats that were in that range that did get flipped, sometimes by less than a couple hundred votes, but they got flipped. That caused a wave of people to go, well, maybe there's a lot more flippable than we ever thought. Now what we're seeing is, because there's a lot of questions about the incumbency of Joe Biden, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to comment. I mean, I have my own personal opinions, but those are a national concern. They've made it across the nation. Saturday Night Live's joked about it. Everybody's joked about it, talked about it. That power of the incumbency to pull people across the line, it's wavering. You've had people on the left and right discussing this. All the policy wonks, like the people that work with me on my staff, we've been talking about it, and we've noticed it in the Capitol. A lot of the cockiness with people that were in, say, that +6 range on either party, yeah, they've tripled down on fighting for that last vote because they realize they're not as safe as they once thought they were. So that has some power. There's also some power tonight. I'm very giddy and excited because there's a couple people that turned on the Second Amendment community during the last year, and I can't wait for the poll to close to confirm what I want to say, but I'm going to wait till 8 o'clock to say it. But a couple of them are out of a job at the end of the year. And that, I think, is going to send some really stiff shutters through the hallways. And I'm not going to claim it's been all the 2A community to do it, but we were a major player in it. And so candidates thinking that they can't, once they get into office, they can do what they want for 12 years in California. I think that notion, unless you're in a really big seat like a Nancy Pelosi that's like a +40, like it's just so
right.
grossly slanted. If you're not in there, you're pretty susceptible. I mean, we could even look to, the state elections. Nobody thought Steve Garvey would be sitting in the position he appears to be sitting tonight.
Huge surprise.
Yeah.
And actually, let's talk about polling. I'm curious of what your opinion is on this. I've been trying to kind of gather it myself, and you, for the most part, you've had slanted polls, right? I can't even I can't even tell you going through college the arguments that I would have with other students and other teachers in the 2016 elections, primarily on who would win versus what polls were saying. Right now, at least on the national stage, because that's where the polls are most apparent, right? But even locally, you're starting to see a little bit of a shift. I think right now the aggregate has Trump somewhere between up 4 and up 6. Last time I checked, I think it was a little above 4. In your opinion, and from what you're seeing, I mean, in my eyes, it could be one of two things. Is that lean or sort of disappearing? Are people becoming more outspoken about who they're voting for? There's been assumptions that a lot of conservative voters, they would avoid those pollsters, and that would create polls that were slanted to maybe having Joe Biden up 6% when in actuality it was 50-50. Is that disappearing, or is that lean still there, but the country is really leaning red right now?
So I think there's a few things that we could say about polling. To start off with, the big disclaimer for our show should be, some of the best, quote, polling of the day was miserably wrong. We can go back to the famous Truman Dewey. Dewey's going to win, and woke up the next morning. Nope, did not win. Not even close. Truman won. Same thing when you were looking at Carter Reagan in the campaign of 80. There's been a lot of polling upsets where pollsters and prognosticators were completely wrong. So that happens. The other issue that I think you have to look at is the sample base. You take a sample that has a lot of college students. Both of us were college students. There were times where I took polls serious, and there were times where I was like, yeah, no, I'd vote for Mickey Mouse. Like, I hate both these guys. Just because I didn't want to answer the question. I didn't want to tell them what I really thought.
Yeah.
There were even some friends of mine that when I was going for my graduate degree that were inside my stats classes, that they loved to go on campus and take polls just to mess up the stats on them. That was their sport. So, there's that. There's a lot of people that switch parties during primaries and play games, trying to set things up. So primary polls to me aren't as, generally speaking, accurate as when we get towards more of the general polls. But what I will say is I think there's definitely a shift. If you look at where the country is going right now, there's a lot more people that have left the left and moved more towards the center. I also think that you can look at some of the people and say, and Elon Musk looks fairly Republican, even though he was registered Democrat. Well, how'd that happen? Because it moved. And, the joke is that if John F. Kennedy was alive today, he'd be considered a Republican and not a Democrat. So I think the party shifted so far left that they left a lot of people in the middle that were disenfranchised. And I think now because of, I would call it darn near hyperinflation. I know that's a bad term for a lot of people to use, but I see people suffering at grocery lines and things like that. I think with all the other things that have happened with immigration, regardless of where you stand on that issue, there's people that are definitely on the left but think that they've been lied to. I think a lot of people are looking for change.
But what is that change? So how is that, in your opinion, affecting the polls? Is it that the bias is being eliminated, or are just more people on one side?
I think there's more people on one side, and I think, personally, some of those polls, their numbers have been suppressed. I think the numbers are actually probably larger on some of those polls, and the pollsters don't want to look that like it's moved that much, and so they're holding back.
Well, I guess all of that remains to be seen. It's going to be a wild ride to November. I guess sort of coming back to California.
Well, I know we said we weren't going to talk much about the presidential, but if you think about the history of this, we just had a Supreme Court victory for Donald Trump that you can't kick him off the ballot. Yet if you listen to what the Supreme Court said, they were like, hey, there's some stuff that you guys should have been taking care of at the state level. We're not going to rule on that. So they left them an avenue if they wanted to deploy it. But I think the message of a 9-0 verdict was you're not to play these games with the presidential election. You do have a president who is running again for a second term, and that's had mixed results historically. But looking at him running for the second term, he is definitely out in his party way ahead of the pack. No one's close to him. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty. There's uncertainty if the Democratic nominee, which is obviously President Biden, what if he's not mentally fit? That's a big question among Americans. There's the question of, does Trump survive if he's indicted and convicted or not? There's technically nothing against the law for us to elect a president that's been convicted. So, there's a lot of questions. I think a lot of people are just for the first time coming intact with the Constitution. One of the fun things about that is when you start to read part of the Constitution, you find yourself reading a good chunk of that Constitution, and you start going, wait a second, I have that right? And I have that right? Wait, then what those people, that's not right. And then that I also think wakes up the voter population.
Well, hopefully more of it wakes up and continues to wake up through November. I guess bringing it back to California, looking through the lens of the Second Amendment, that doesn't necessarily discriminate between political parties. How much of a myth would it be for someone to say that it does, that it does discriminate against political parties? I guess the question that I'm asking you is, in your position, how many allies within the Second Amendment do you see that wear the Democratic political, sign?
That's actually an excellent question. There are some people on days like today that will wear an elephant or a donkey on them to say, look what party I'm from. But a lot of people don't. I think I have become much more adept at realizing that what everybody should realize, the Second Amendment, which we represent here, and often the First and some of the other amendments that are conjoined with it, don't belong to a political party. That's mistake number one. They belong to the American people. And I'm a firm believer in that. I'm also a firm believer that if you were to look at some of the polls that we didn't talk about, there are polls that I think are much more accurate, much more interesting to me. California has a diverse population, as we both know. But what's also equally diverse is the Second Amendment adherence in that population. That's where I think the Democratic Party makes some mistakes. They would like to portray this right as belonging to men basically over 55, white,
right,
long in the tooth, a dying breed. But if you were actually to go out and see the younger generations, we have an explosion of different activities that encompass primarily females over men and females of color. And I look at the exploding population of Asian Americans, and I have found that like going to talk to somebody about their political preference in the Asian community, I'm usually not going to find out. But I start talking to them about firearms, they start telling me about all the firearms they own, and then they start telling me why they don't like certain politicians because they're going after the firearms. You know, that's a pretty good tell of where they are politically.
Sure, it's like a gateway.
You know, same thing with the Latinos in this state. There's a lot of Latinos that are, you know, they say what they say out in the public because they fear some of the political backlash from the Dems, but they carry firearms, and some of them are Dems, but they vote Republican. I mean, like, and some vote for good Dems. And again, you know, we'll talk about some of the races in the Central Valley, but, you know, I can bring up one of them, former Assembly Member Rudy Salas, and a couple other guys. Adam Gray is another great example. Both of them Democrats. Don't agree with them on everything, but when it comes to the Second Amendment, they've always stood side by side with us and fought for the Second Amendment, voted for the Second Amendment, and lobbied people in their own party to just not vote, and at a cost sometimes to both of those guys politically. So that's why I always point out there are some very strong Dems that work day in and day out to try to preserve our rights. And then we have some marginal Dems who may not always vote for your AR-15, but they vote for a lot of your other rights and hold the line. And so, you know, like a great example to me would be Senators Dodd and Cortese up in Northern California, not your 2A, let's go get our AR-15s and go out, but they are the guys that will sit there and say, hey, we're spot on with you when it comes to your hunting rights. We're spot on to you when kids going out and getting scholarships for this stuff, and they will hold that ground.
Well, how is that for you? So how is that for you, you know, up in the Capitol? You know, obviously not everybody's political views are, you know, specifically correlated to one political talking point. And, you know, honestly, it breaks my heart that this is a political talking point at all. But the fact of the matter is that it is, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, does that in any way kind of make it awkward for you up in the Capitol, or is it pretty strictly you are able to talk about 2A or anti-2A bills with these people, and it's just about that?
So there's obviously some offices, I'm just going to be upfront, like in the swing space where their offices are at, they have these lights that are red and green. I've had offices when they saw me or one of my friends like Sam Paredes or Dan Reed, now Keely Hopkins that works for NRA, coming down the hallway, boom, the light changes colors. And I am no longer, you know, the guy that's going to be there talking. So, you know, in those offices, it makes no difference. In the other offices, there are a lot of people, you know, I consult a lot of the people in the Outdoor Sporting Caucus, which is the majority are Dems. And we have very cordial conversations. And I have some of those members saying, yeah, I can side with you on that. I have some members saying, I can't side with you on that, but I just won't vote. And they don't. And so there's honesty and integrity about where people come from and viewpoints. I've been able to have very cordial conversations, hear other people's viewpoints, educate them, and that's fine. And I've had some of those people saying, hey, you can go say this to these people. I can't. I've even had a couple of people on both parties say, hey, you need 2 more votes. Let me give you some information that you may be able to go to this office or that office and get it. So that's the nature of politics up there. But and then I also have some really good friends. You know, I got to do a shout out to our assembly member from this area, Phil Chen. His office has always been like my hiding place to go to. Has great snacks. I will dearly miss him and his staff when he's no longer up there, but we always have people like that. And then, even people like Reggie Jones Sawyer, who is no friend of the Second Amendment, but Reggie can be very cordial and has also sometimes been helpful in a weird way. So,
well, you're talking about specific people. Maybe we can talk about a couple of political races that you're sincerely interested in. I can tell you one that I am sincerely interested in. And actually, I guess before we get into that, last year, Assembly Bill 28. Okay.
Oh, yes.
This is the 11% tax that they were trying to impose. You came on the show several times. You called it the zombie bill. This is an excise tax that they were trying to impose on Californians additionally for year after year after year. Last year, they finally got it passed. Why is it that bill passed? And what race may be connected to that are you looking at?
Yeah. And actually, I think this is a great bill for us to break down tonight on this program because we did do that in chunks over several years, you and I. And I think a lot of times for us, it all fits because we live this day in, day out. But I think for a lot of you out there watching this, it's like, oh, I think I heard that bill. I think I heard that bill. So that was a bill that was originally started by Levine, and Levine carried it. And here's the funny part that we haven't talked about, the politics in the Capitol. So let's just go play on the Dem side for a few minutes. So on the Dem side, the assumption is by the Republicans, who are 2A gun owners, well, they're all in bed together. They all love each other. It's all just one big super majority love fest. Yeah, no, not even close. That is the most, I'm getting over a cold, is the most vindictive, backstabbing group of people. And I'm not giving the Republicans a clean ride that they don't do it to each other, because they do. And we're going to talk about that in several races tonight. But they will backstab each other. They play games with each other. When I was working with one of my staffers, I told him, I said, when we have the regime change, which we had both in the Senate and the Assembly, it's the wailing and gnashing of teeth, because you watch staffers jumping ship because you had offices, because someone held a position, that they could have a staff of 8. But all of a sudden, oh, you played for the old regime. This is the new regime. So now you have a closet for office, and you get a staff of 2. And somebody had a staff of 2. So you have all these people moving. You have the politics of, like, if I can get that staffer, I can get that intel on this group of people. So, you watch the wailing and gnashing of teeth. The second part of it was Levine was not well liked. So part of the ways we got some of those bills stopped was literally going up to some of the people he was trying to get votes from and going like, really? Didn't he mess your bill up on this date and this one on this date? Yeah. And then you're going to pass this pile of junk? Well, that's a good point. And then they wouldn't vote for him. So we were able to defeat it. Levine termed out, and Gabriel took the bill over. And Gabriel has not been as antagonistic as I would say within his party as Levine had been, so he pulled that. And that led to some game playing that led up to the day of 28 getting passed. And when 28 got passed, we had a couple of people, including a member by the name of Melissa Hurtado, who had...
You said it.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to stop you there because I remember talking to you leading up to the vote on this bill. I remember you being optimistic. I remember you being actually kind of, what's the word? I guess robotic about it, because it was kind of like, here we go again. They did this to us last year. We beat it. They did this to us the year before. We beat it.
Yep.
And then that vote comes and it goes the opposite way. And I remember talking to you the next day. You were not a happy camper.
Nope.
So why was it exactly that you weren't a happy camper?
Well, because there's a general agreement with a lot of people up in the Capitol, and I've always played by the game of like, hey, if you tell us, any of us in our group, that you're not going to vote for us, that's your right. We're Americans, okay. If you tell us you're not going to vote, cool. If you're going to vote for us, cool. Just if you're going to change your mind, can you tell us you're going to change your mind? Just be honest about it. So she's going down the hall like everybody else to vote. We're like, are we good? She tells our side, we're great. Nothing to worry about. So I'm not worried about the bill even coming up at that point of the session. And when Gabriel rises and says, hey, we're going to vote on 28, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why would...
Because at that point, you're assuming that he
don't
knows
have, you don't have
he
the
doesn't
votes.
have the votes.
And he starts to talk, and next thing we know, Melissa Hurtado stands up and becomes, and we're thinking, oh, she's going to say why you shouldn't vote for it. She comes from a strong hunting community in the Central Valley, lots of duck hunters and stuff in the area, and she boldly gets up there and says, I'm all about this. We felt, and we said in testimony, that Gabriel had been extremely misleading with the excise tax and had said some derogatory things about hunters, and she got up and spewed the same stuff, and we were just like, what? And it wasn't just us. I remember watching Senators Dodd and Cortese, who were leading the Dems that opposed the bill, and they just stood up and went like, huh? And then a couple of the other Dems that spoke out against 28 literally called her out and said, I don't even know what that was about. Like, they were equally shocked because she hadn't told anybody.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, it kind of became a quest from that point forward to remind all the hunting community inside of her district.
That is an educational experience,
Right.
Educating people on who voted for and against
Right.
Assembly Bill 28. But essentially, it seems like what you're saying is, if there was such thing as political honesty, she broke it.
Oh, hands down.
Which ended up leading to a yay vote on Assembly Bill 28. I mean, was that by one vote?
No, it's by a couple of votes, but what our big thing was, it wouldn't have happened had she not done what she did. And part of this, too, comes down to the other part of politics, and this is what I've been trying to convince our people since. When a politician does this, you have to remember some key words in our everyday language and our government language. Politicians are classified as public servants. The problem is the public, that's us, the people, have forgotten that makes their boss. They serve us. They have flipped that narrative to we serve them. We're beholden to them. And we've got to flip that narrative back. And one of the ways we do that is concentrating on certain campaigns this season and flipping those seats, denying seats. Because here's what happens, Kevin, when you vacate your seat to run for another office, yeah, you can finish your term, but you're done. That's it. That's the end of the road for that term. So, for example, if at the conclusion of tonight, say, Valadeo and Salas end up becoming the top two people in that district, she's done. She's not running for Congress, and she'll be termed out.
Well,
or not termed out, but she'll be out of office at the end of the year.
Right, with no prospects, right?
Right.
So
she'll have to start over, which is not easy for a politician who wasn't able to, and she wasn't able to fundraise. And so
yeah,
that becomes now something that we can look at people in the future and say, well, remember what happened to her, remember what happened to this person. Do you really know your constituents well enough to take that risk?
Well, and then that becomes, a victory for the Second Amendment community, whether it's 100% the doing of them or not, through educating people on how these individuals are acting with their role as what is supposed to be a public servant, with their vote up in the Capitol. I was curious on another race.
I want to bring something else up on this, too, because you touched on it lightly, and I think it's a point that for all of you watching this live stream tonight, you really got to take home. Our community, when I first got involved in it, when I was younger than you, it really was kind of what I called the old school gun store mentality. It was like, oh, Kevin's got a 2A head on it. You can come in. One of the guys off camera is in shirts and slacks. They might look at him and go, you don't have gun stuff on him. Probably not one of us. And probably would have treated him less than fairly. And so that was kind of the way the community worked. You had to kind of know the guidelines to whatever range, whatever you were doing. Our community now is much broader and much more connected. Chuck Michelle, our president, always talks about, well over half the people that own a firearm in California could be called nightstand firearms owners.
Yeah.
They don't go to gun shows, they don't hunt, they don't do a lot of things, but they're one of us. So how do we interconnect to those? Well, those are people of color. Those are people in agriculture. You know who else they are? People are self-reliant. I've been going out working, as you know, with a coalition of people that deal with self-reliance. The average person I meet with, regardless of their color of skin, looks like some hippie or really, it's just all over the place. And yet, 90% of them, when they find out what I do, are like, that's so cool, dude, you defend our gun rights. And I'm like, you own a gun? And they're like, I own 8 of them. And I'm like, wow, because judging the book by its cover, you wouldn't know that. And I think that's a failure in politics in California is we've got a lot of people that sit there on the dais, all high and mighty, because they look out their crowd, like in places like, Pasadena, and go, but you have a lot of urban farmers, you have a lot of self-reliance people in there, and guess what they own? Firearms. And once we connect to them, that becomes part of the base.
The fishing community as well. And I think, there has been a huge disservice done to this whole political process and the way people are governed just with the identity politics movement. I understand that there have been massive gains on one side by the use of that movement, but that doesn't mean it's good for the country or the state as a whole. But I was interested in your take, on another race where you were talking about vacating a seat kind of makes you start over if you don't get into that final 2. Well, and I guess before we even get into that, what are the parameters that you see here tonight? You hear a lot of people talking 51% of the vote. As far as California is concerned, you have a closed primary. As far as the presidential race is concerned, it's a winner-takes-all closed primary. So you have Republicans voting on a Republican ballot, Democrats voting on a Democrat ballot, independents voting on an independent ballot. Some of those people, unfortunately, can't even vote for president, which is extremely interesting. But as far as the assembly, the Senate, the state assembly, Congress in general, what are you looking at? Is there anybody who will have a seat who is running opposed after tonight?
Yeah, so there's one that will happen, and that is the race for Dianne Feinstein's seat. The Kurt, you can double check us on this, but I think it's Kurt's our off screen person that's double checking us.
We'll call him the data analyst for tonight.
Data analyst for tonight. But what he is going to be looking up and just double checking, but for the short term of now until the end of the year, when the new term would begin for Senate, Feinstein probably would not have retired. She probably would have wrote it out, but she passed away, as we all know. So there is a shot that it appears by early polling that the 2 people in the lead would be Adam Schiff, who's vacating his position in Congress to run for Senate, and former baseball player for the Dodgers, Steve Garvey. There have been a couple polls that show that Garvey could actually win that seat. So whoever, I believe this will come out because they're not going to hold the seat open. Whoever the majority is for the short term will win that seat. The rest of them, it would be the top 2 candidates that will go at it in November.
So what you're saying is overall, as far as CRPA is concerned, as far as our takeaway, our strategy, all of that stuff, we're looking tonight as at the primary as an opportunity to create a strategy or at least to start seeing how it's going to unfold in November. Correct?
Correct.
That's when the general elections happen, but will only 2 people from each race go from now to November?
Correct.
So you're only going to have 2. So if you got 8 people running for, I don't know, what do you want to say, House of Representatives, tonight it's getting whittled down to 2, and then those 2 will go to the general in November when one of them will be elected and the other one not. So aside from those who are not up for election this year, these elections that we have going on, they are really to tell us the story of who the 1v1 race is going to be going forward?
Well, I think there's that. And I think the other thing you have to look at is, and this is the tricky thing in politics. So we have some areas here in the state that we'll talk about in the next hour, probably as we're leading up to the 8 o'clock hour, where we have multiple candidates, like you said, running. We have some candidates that are, I call them perennial candidates. They run for something every election and don't get elected every election. And some of them have been doing it for 20 years. Okay, at some point, the voters in that area have to realize that Billy or Betty, probably not an electable candidate.
Sure.
However, unfortunately, what happens is because of the Billies and Bettys in the political world, you may look at Sam or Julie, who ran a very effective campaign, came in third or fourth out of 8 or 9 candidates, and go, well, they're like Bill and Betty. No, they're not. That was their first candidacy. That's where they built their name recognition. And like the Bill 28, it took them 6 tries to get that through. Sometimes what we have to realize is round 1 in an election is getting name recognition. Round 2 is where you bring that home to bear. And so a lot of that is keeping those people up. And that's one of the things I think chapter programs are great for. But I mean, if you think about it, if you've got a really good candidate in an area that you believe in, there's no reason if they came in third or fourth that you don't want them still going out and speaking at civic groups, speaking at gun shows if they're a 2A proponent, speaking at these, get them out in front of many people and keeping them out there so their name stays out there and they say, hey, I'm going to run again because I still believe what I do. Gives them some time to build up their campaign war chest, but it also keeps them in the minds of the voters. And then when the person that did get in falters or doesn't do that well, the voters know, hey, we have somebody that has stayed in touch with us, maintained those relationships, maintained that base, and they often take it the second time around.
And has those values. I
Right.
think that's what's important. You want to keep the ones around that have those values. So it seems like what you're saying is essentially just like how somebody would maybe go from getting elected to city council, then to board of supervisors, then maybe to state assembly, to something national. You could have a candidate who isn't necessarily successful their first couple goes, but if they do stay around, they stay engaged, they could then get elected and start moving up. So it all kind of comes down to the, I guess you could put quotes around it, the farm team, right? So, I mean, how does that necessarily translate into California's future? Do you see that as a promising thing within the Second Amendment community? I know that the chapters have been putting a lot of effort into getting people's names out there and getting their chapter members educated on what these people stand for. We've seen some candidates come for local elections out of the chapter program, as well as the communication between existing campaigns. Is that something you see as promising for the future?
Yeah, I think it's very promising. I think one of the things that we've got to be more effective as is getting those coalitions together that we've been building. We've done a tremendous amount of work, but I think it's also us bring them to a casual conversation, getting these candidates. I mean, some of the most beautiful moments I've seen for CRPA and a couple other groups this year is having an open forum where the candidates just seem like we are talking. You get to know them, they get to know you, they get to know where they're at. It's, Americans are about stories. And when, I had a young lady who, I'll do a shout out to Otter, but I loved it when Otter sat there and looked at a couple of the politicians up in the Capitol a year ago on our Capitol Day and said, you realize that in my high school, when our football team plays against a neighboring high school, there's at least one ambulance. Because you know what they know? Someone's going to the hospital tonight. Yet, in our shotgun league, with loaded firearms, with people of all degrees, we've had 1 million trigger pulls. No one's ever went to the hospital. No ambulance has ever been called. No moms had to rush their kid in the back of the station wagon or the minivan to get them to the ER. Never happened. And I had Dems who aren't big fans go, that was provocative, because Americans love stories. They love to know that. And getting that connectivity is great, because now I've heard a couple of those Dems caution people before the vote. They're like, I don't know if I buy that argument.
Right.
Because they have that story.
Well, maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. Guys, we are heading into a break. Maybe we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break. We're coming up to 7 o'clock here. Again, the ballots or the ballot boxes close at 8 o'clock. If you have not voted yet, please get out there and vote. We've been saying it all year. We've been saying it the entire existence of this YouTube channel. We need to actually take action when it's time to vote. Today is the last day to do it, so go ahead and go cast your vote if you haven't done that. I definitely wanted to talk to you, Rick, after the break about Capitol Day, and maybe we could start looking at some of these maps, what California looked like, what maybe we're projecting it to look like, and what we might start seeing as these counts start rolling in at 8 o'clock. So, guys, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back with you soon. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the live stream today. Again, my name is Kevin Small. I am here with Rick Travis, who is the Legislative Director for the California Rifle and Pistol Association. And we're just hanging out tonight on this Super Tuesday, waiting for the ballot boxes to close, which is going to happen in about an hour. So again, if you have not gone out to vote, there is still time, as we continue to say, as we will continue to say, leading up to the November general elections. It is so important for our voices to be heard. It's days like today when we can make that happen. So, guys, also, we are seeing the comments come in. For those of you commenting on some of these technical difficulties, this is our first live stream, so bear with us a little bit. If you're talking about camera angles, if you're talking about cameras going down, we're working this stuff out. Obviously, for future live streams, we're going to take some of these more critical ones into consideration to make this experience as good as possible. So, Rick, leading into this last hour coming up toward the ballot box is closing here in California, I thought it would be prudent to go through some of the maps that we have. So I guess you can sort of take this and understand what the demographics were like in California and potentially look at some races and how things could either change or stay the same. Let's go ahead and start. Jacob, if you could pull up the House of Representatives for 2022. So you're probably going to, I mean, you look at all these maps and you kind of see a similar thing, right? You've got the coast, which is blue, and you've got the eastern portion of the state, which is red. I mean, is this sort of the telltale sign for 2024?
Not really, and this is what I'm going to say by not really. Like, if you look in like Southern California, not all of that blue along the coast. There's some red in there with Orange County, some other areas. When you get down to precinct level, this is where I think it's very interesting because like San Bernardino County is a great example. LA County is a great example. There are precincts that show blue. So you automatically assume, well, there's no red there.
Right.
No. When you actually get there, those were areas that might have only been +2 or 3, which meant literally if you were to look at like, say, a precinct having 50 tracts of homes, it meant flipping 3 to 4 votes per tract of homes. You know, when I talk to people, is there a way for you to walk around, talk to your neighbors and get them to do something that maybe they didn't want to do before? Yeah. Well, if 4 neighbors get 4 neighbors and every one of those tracts, it goes the other way. So some of that's misleading. You know, there's obviously areas like San Francisco, very, very blue. But you also have to look from a 2A perspective. San Francisco is really blue, and thanks to the work of this organization, the CRPA, they went from like less than 100 CCWs to now they've broken over 2,000 or headed towards 3,000 CCWs. Is that the number I want to see in San Francisco? No, of course not. But it's progress moving in the right area. And I think that's the thing that Californians have to realize. You know, Kevin, when this state started off, it started off as a state that was Democratically governor, Democratic Assembly, Democratic Senate. No one was allowed to vote. People were allowed to vote, take that back. No one was allowed to hunt or to have a firearm outside or do pretty much anything. And then the pendulum swung the other way. And all those rights got in play, and the pendulums went back and forth. That's the history of this state.
Right.
So for people to say, it's all over. No, you got to fight for what you love and believe in. And that's why I constantly tell people on the road, too, you got to look at Texas. Texas was a state that, you know, when I moved there in the military and left being a California citizen, became a Texas citizen, that was under Governor Richards. That entire state was Democratic, including a very famous Trump member of his cabinet, you know, former Governor Rick of Texas. Rick was a Democrat at the time and wasn't in favor of the Second Amendment, but because of an incident that happened in Texas, the people of Texas changed their mind and said, no, Second Amendment is really important to us, and flipped the state. Now you're seeing the state kind of ebb the other way again. So That happens in American politics, but I think having this defeatist attitude is completely unacceptable.
Well, can you kind of explain to me here? I mean, from a bird's eye view here, you're looking at a state that's mostly red.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily where all the districts lie. I mean, we certainly send more representatives to Congress that fall in the Democrat category than fall in the Republican category. These really large districts, why are they so large? And why, especially when you get to the Bay Area as well as the LA area, do the districts get so small? So it's strictly based on population?
Right. Once you get to a certain number, then you have to make another district because it's based now. California lost population, so we lost a member in Congress because of that. And that's part of the redistricting thing. But if you go back and look at this too, there's things you can learn from this map that I think our community needs to learn. If you look at the Central Valley, when you're looking at, say, like 5 and 20 and 32, and I believe that's 13, I'm saying the distance from the map. But if you look at those numbers, those are ag areas. Those are areas that have a very diverse population. A lot of people who have descended from India, Pakistan, various countries in Asia, Latin America, live in those areas. Some of those areas are like in the 60% or better Latino vote. Well, wait a second, Kevin. I've been told by people in blue areas that should be blue just based on that one fact, but it's not. So I think that's one of the areas that people have to realize that that's one of the lies that's told. The second one is going out and encouraging people to go, well, why are those people that way? Well, the people are that way because they know the value of food. They know the value of home ownership. They know things that we've got to go out and push. And so this is one of the areas that you can look and say, well, can I find people with those same values in the blue areas and flip them? And the answer is yes.
Anybody that you can think of running for the House of Reps that would be a sincere ally to the Second Amendment movement here in California?
Oh, there's several people that are running that I thought we were going to talk about in the next hour.
Okay, well, yeah, we can save that for later.
But yeah, there are several people that are running that are really good. There are some people that are getting their names out there. We could look at we can go up to a blue district and play with that one. So in District 2, you got Jared Huffman, who is the Democratic incumbent. He's raised quite a lot of money. I think he's got a little over $1 million cash on hand. He has dispersed about $380,000 into this campaign. He's facing off 2 Republicans, Chris Columba, who has about $12,000 on hand and has probably spent about $50,000-ish. And then you got Teef Gibbs, who is also running, is a member of one of our chapters. And I've worked with her. She's done a great job. She doesn't have the finances that the other ones have, but she's had a great campaign. The campaign for Teef this time around is name recognition. She's that person that I've talked about getting out there. Now, could she take second? Sure, she could take second and build that up. But if tonight she doesn't pull off second place, by no means is Teef done. This was getting her name out there, getting her recognition. Now she can get into talk places that she couldn't have got before because she's a former candidate now for Congress. And so that will open up some doors that gets her name out there, gets more recognition. And, I don't think Huffman has a lockhold on that. That is, Kurt, what's that district rated as? A D what? So Kurt will be looking those up and getting those numbers for us. But as we look at some of these, it's very easy to see where we're at.
Well, that kind of brings up another question. And I mean, this isn't just going to be for the House of Representatives or Senate, but really any race that you see. How much does the money actually come into play? You have huge discrepancies in war chests and money spent between candidates. Some of them are tighter than others, but what exactly is it that money does to help somebody get ahead in the vote?
Well, so here's what it does. It depends on the campaigns people are running. So if you're running a monetary campaign versus a monetary campaign, which means marketing, advertising, playing all sorts of social media games. We can take a campaign that is being replayed slightly differently tonight, but you can look at a race that's happening in Orange County, Katie Porter's district, that she vacated to run for U.S. Senate, along with Barbara Lee, and Steve Garvey as the four front runners in that race. Katie Porter has a heck of a war chest. She has the backing of Elizabeth Warren. When she ran for Congress, she ran against a perennial candidate, Scott Baugh. She grossly outnumbered the finances of Scott, had an incredible multi-million-dollar war chest. I remember, I live in that district. I remember there wasn't a bus stop that you didn't see Katie Porter's face on. You can go into a movie theater. You can go anywhere and flip on your phone and not get a geo-targeted Katie Porter ad. Like, I was so sick of like turning on my phone and seeing Katie Porter's face that like, if I voted on just sheer being annoyed, I would have voted against her.
That's how I am with these Josh Newman ads, man. Every single YouTube video that I watch, I cannot go between videos without getting a Josh Newman ad.
Right, and that's they're based it on recognition that what will happen is it's like that old game with, you tell somebody 5 minutes before they're going to publicly speak, whatever you say, don't say dumb, and then within the first 5 seconds of their speech, dumb comes out, and that's what they're hoping for. That, and they look at the American voter as having less attention span than a goldfish, and so they figure if they get their name out there enough. However, to Scott Baugh's credit, he ran with another group of people that were ready to overturn the biggest city council recall ever in U.S. history. The people trying to prevent that overthrow spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars more. But what that group of people did was they went back to old school politics. It was multiple events for 5 months, people's backyards, barbecues, meet and greets. I mean, like, just press the flesh with people. And as a result, after spending all that war chest down, Katie Porter won. But Katie Porter only won by 3,000 votes.
I was going to say barely.
And when Katie Porter only won by 3,000 votes, that was huge because it meant, A, Scott did win. Scott bled her war chest down. She had to go in to get more money to run for Senate. Scott also proved he could bleed the war chest down, which when David Min in that district decided to leave the Senate to run for Congress, then David Min screwed himself up, and we'll show that in a little bit. But he had some issues, and so Scott's in a pretty good position to roll into November this time around because the Dems had to split themselves apart. So that's part of the game. And so even when you go back to this District 2, it's a D plus 20. It's a solid Dem. It means that, literally you're looking at 70% of the electorate there is Democrat. But it only takes one mistake to flip it. And it takes building up and pressing the flesh and getting people to understand. And a lot of times when you go out and talk to Dems that own guns, they all of a sudden start to go, oh, you're not all the bad things I was told about. No, I am not. And then you can make things happen.
Well, right, and simultaneously you're planting seeds, getting name recognition for specific people in that area. So there's lots of opportunities for the future. But I guess the Katie Porter the Katie Porter example that you gave there, I guess sort of alludes to the fact that even if there is a discrepancy in war chests, I mean 3,000 votes, man, that can go either way very easily. So that would kind of prove that even if there is a discrepancy in the war chests, it can be overcome if you've got the right crowd and you've got the right message. So I guess kind of rounding out the House of Representatives, this is a
well, let's go to just a second. Jacob, do you have that video for us for David Min?
I can get it real quick.
Okay, let's talk about 47.
And David Min is running for the House of Reps. That's a federal seat.
Right.
David Min has been in the California Senate, right?
Correct.
So he's been putting forward some erroneous bills from the California Senate. One of them, which we just had a good victory in court with the Crossroads or the B&L Productions versus Newsom lawsuit. But it was Senator Min's bill that really started the attack from the legislature on banning gun shows from state-owned property. He has now vacated that seat and is running for the House of Representatives. Jacob, let me know when you got the video ready to roll. And maybe after that, we can just sort of put on CBS. Guys, I know that it's mainstream media. I know that this is the same mainstream media that called Arizona in the first hour of the 2020 election. But I did want to have something on the screen for all of us that we could sort of watch the national picture while we talk about the state picture. Because ultimately, as far as CRPA is concerned, while the federal seats do have implications, the state seats are going to be extremely important to us as well. The House of Representatives, though, all of these seats are up for grabs, right?
Yeah.
So these are 2-year terms. The last time that they had these elections for the California House of Representatives was in 2022, which is the map that you see on your screen. All of that is every single seat in every single district is getting voted for today.
Yeah, so 47 is currently blue.
Right.
And we're going to put up the plus or minus for 47. Our guys are getting all this information up. We're getting a video ready to show. But let's talk about the 4 candidates. So this was Katie Porter's seat. This is where she was pontificating for the last 2 years after being Scott Baugh by 3,000 votes, which was just about 1% of the vote. So not like she had a mandate, but she certainly acted like she did. So she announced she's going to vacate the seat. She became the first one to jump out, even before Dianne Feinstein had passed away or said she wasn't going to run, by saying, hey, we're going to go for it. This seat is in a toss-up in 2022. It was, equal 50-50, so it wasn't a plus anything. And now, now what we're looking at in 24, Porter, won with 51% of the vote. So now where do we look? So we got Scott running again. So we look at cash on hand. Right now, Scott's got $1.7 million cash on hand. That's quite a bit of money.
At least for a House of Representatives race.
And I believe this is not just a toss-up for 24, but it leans slightly dim in that area. I think it's a D+3. But here's what you got. You have David Min, who's running, who was the front runner. This is going to be a Scott Baugh, David Min race. And then David Min, one night in Sacramento, is having a good old time. And the David Min one? Okay. Sorry, a little technical difficulty there where we got some people
We're trying to pull up
this
David Min video,
what
you'll
you'll see in this video that's really interesting is a PAC has ran this video. It's been on major news, so we're not taking advantage of anything. But David Min decided to go out and have a really great time and drank, and then drank some more, then apparently drank a lot more, and then got behind the wheel of a car. And the irony in this is David Min, who can be one of the most pretentious people in Sacramento, look down his nose at everybody and tell everybody what the law is, how they should abide by law, how he is the most law-abiding citizen, do not play games, do not do this, do not do that. And yet what you will see on this video is, he wasn't just drunk, he was twice the legal limit. And while the officers are arresting him for driving under the influence, he is actually asking them if there's a way for them not to make this public.
I think that is actually the most prominent part of this. You have these people who continue, especially in their arguments for bills that are anti-Second Amendment. They just come from this virtuous place, and then to see something like that is completely awful. It just seems completely backwards. You have somebody who comes from a virtuous place in telling the California people that we shouldn't have guns, because they're awful. But then you see them doing this in another portion of their life. And Jacob, if you actually have it, go ahead and roll the video.
So we can tell you. So there it is. You know, they've just pulled their Senator Min, being pulled to the back of the car. You know, they've got him over there. You're going to see him being tested. So they go ahead and test him. They're looking at his eyes. And
Video just, I guess you're just going to have to take our word for it. You know,
anyways, you can look this up. You can just look up David Min, DUI. I'll actually have one of our guys go back and find the website. We'll give it to you so you can look at it. So Kurt, if you could do that for us, that'd be great. But here's what is so sad. In that video, and if we can get it for you, we'll show it to you. But he actually sits there and asks the CHP officers, is there any way not to have this come out? At that point, he becomes known as DUI Dave. That causes a lot of problems for the Democrats because that made him an easy target for Scott Baugh to go after. So then they found Joanna Weiss. So here's what's happened. In this race, they have literally spent between Min and Weiss $3 million decide who will be the Democratic challenger against Scott Baugh. Scott has literally spent about $220,000 in the race. But both of them, Joanna has about $500,000, which means Scott's got almost 3.5 times more money than she does for the general election going into this.
And that's a huge win, right?
Yeah.
For two anti-Second Amendment politicians just trying to get through today.
Right.
You know, and then having to look forward to November, even if they were, you know, one of the top, whichever one of them gets it, if the other one is Scott Baugh, that is a huge win for us, for them to spend that money fighting each other as opposed to fighting against somebody who is pro Second Amendment. And that's what we're looking at. And this is a blue area as of now, right?
Right. So this area could flip back to red, and it's basically blue because of redistricting games that got played by the Dems because they had control of that in this state. And so that's one of the things that you have to realize is that this could very easily be flipped back in this race. This is a flippable race. It's why the Democratic Party nationwide threw so much money into this primary, was because they wanted to get rid of David Min because they see him as a loser, which you're actually going to hear me say this tonight. I actually agree with the Democratic Party. He is a loser. But, you know, that wasn't sarcasm. I actually did agree with them.
Just straight losing. Well, I guess you have a similar situation in the Senate. Kurt, if you could pull up the Senate map from, I believe, 2022. It looks kind of similar, but there's a little bit more blue in the central portion of the state. I'm sure that gerrymandering was having something to do with that, at least a little bit. But let's talk about a race similar in the Senate. We've already mentioned it a little bit, but you do have the Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Democrat against Democrat thing.
That's the U.S. Senate race, not the state Senate.
Oh, I apologize. I thought we were going to the U.S. Senate. Kurt, could you pull up the U.S. Senate? Oh, you know what? We don't have a map for U.S. Senate because there's only 2 seats. Well, fair enough. We can. Okay, he's got it there, anyways. So, can you give us a little bit of insight into this race, the history leading up to it? You know, you have what seems like a top 2, and then Katie Porter, right? What happens to Katie Porter for the rest of her term if she's not in the top 2 here?
Well, she's not in the top 2. She's already vacated because we just talked about her former seat that she holds right now as a congresswoman. That seat is going to be decided who the final 2 are going to go into November to replace her. So she will literally be. This is the 3 things that would happen. Tonight, if she doesn't make it into the final 2, she becomes a very ineffective member of Congress because she can comment on whatever she wants, but she's of no value to anybody else in Congress. She's not going to be there the next term.
So if you don't have a future, you don't have value.
Right. You're not going to hold a seat of power because you're not moving up. You're moving out. Your staff, they live back there. So guarantee you, like if you walk through, this is one of the most brutal things. My first time doing this was when I first went up to work in Sacramento, and Kurt Pringle, I'll date myself, he was the head of the assembly. He was the speaker. And Cruz Bustamante ran a very effective campaign, and it was done. Cruz was going to be it. Kurt lost his re-election. He wasn't going to stay speaker. So I was working as a volunteer for one of the other members of the assembly. I said, hey, no problems. I'll fly up tomorrow morning, get some paperwork moved around for a couple bills that we had that were going to be heard that week. I went up to go do it, and I walk in the hallways, and I called my boss, and I'm like, what happened? Because it's literally Wednesday morning, Kevin. I'm there like at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the hallways have furniture, boxes. And I'm seeing people walk out of offices, and I'm like, huh? Because they work for Republicans, and they're all walking in the Democrat office. And all the senior staffers who are on payroll were jumping ship because their candidate lost, and they knew two things were going to happen that day. Number one, those rooms were going to be downsized. People that had big offices, no longer in power, going to have closets. And that meant staff had to go. So these people were already dropping resumes at every other place that was going to gain positions to get a position. And we watch that all the time on different programs where they're shifting in and out of the Capitol. So that will happen. So half of Porter's staff will literally be looking for a new job tomorrow, somewhere else in Congress. So she loses her staff, she loses her team, she's compromised, and her ability to affect change for the rest of her 8 months is severely diminished.
Well, first of all, that sounds completely cutthroat, which I guess is appropriate for something like politics. But so I guess as far as logic in my head would sound, at most she would be able to help somebody else with her vote for the rest of her duration up there. But what it sounds like what you're saying is somebody in that position. Again, guys, this is assuming because Katie Porter has not come in third in this race yet.
Yeah.
It's just sort of an assumption. But if she finds herself in that
This is
situation,
a hypothetical is what it is.
Right. If she finds herself in that situation, just sounds like not a whole lot of people are gonna find value in working with her. Doesn't mean they don't want to.
The reverse hypothetical is everybody has leaned that this is going to be a two-person race that's going to be Shiff and Garvey. Let's say the electorate pulls a surprise one and all the polls are wrong, and it ends up being Porter and Shiff, which is where the polls were like 5 months ago.
Right.
Now Porter's staff is like, yee-haw, because there's a good chance she's going to the Senate, so they're going to jump in to that and say, okay, we're going to ride this out, and there's going to be people in Congress that want her on committees, want her vote, want to do things because she's going to be moving across into the other side of the building.
Potentially, right?
Right.
And
so
I guess
this is the hypothetical part of politics.
But and then a situation like that would go back to your original statement of, it's so easy to picture Sacramento as this machine, right? And the thing about machines is that every part is placed in there by somebody outside of that machine that has a specific function, and it's all supposed to work together. You're basically saying that's not how Sacramento works. These people don't always work together. In fact, in many cases, they are a little bit cutthroat with each other, and a race like that would kind of be a prime example of that. They would be spending money from two Democrat campaigns fighting against each other, which, I mean, I guess in my eyes, in any situation where a Democrat is fighting a Democrat, or let's go a little bit broader than that, an anti-Second Amendment campaign versus an anti-Second Amendment campaign is good news for the 2A camp. But guys,
because A, they're bleeding down their finances for future fights.
Right.
And B, they're losing a lot of credibility amongst people because they're not able to elevate themselves. Staff is forever. Politicians come and go. That's kind of an adage in both the national and the state capitol. And so that's why I do a lot of work in building relationships with staffers, because I'm going to see them on both sides of the aisles. And so the more trust and more interface time I have with them, the better for the CRPA and the people we represent. I know they got the min thing back up, so we can go to that.
And actually, before we did that, you guys, it is 7:30. This is officially your 30-minute warning. There is a ballot box near you that is going to be closing in 30 minutes. If you have not gone to cast your ballot, again, we will be here when you get back. go ahead and head out and cast your vote today. It is one of the most important things that you can do, especially in this fight for our Second Amendment rights in California. We have to start turning this tide, and it starts on days like today. I also wanted to throw a couple of shout outs out there, you guys. CRPA is a membership organization. We run on memberships and donations, but it's not just from individuals. Businesses are getting into this fight as well. While you see a lot of individuals and a lot of business shying away, especially some of the larger ones that we hear about in mainstream media, but they shy away from political arguments like pro-Second Amendment sentiments. There are some that are putting their feet in the ground and standing with us. So I did just want to do a little shout out to the Police Credit Union as well as CCW Safe. Guys, these are two businesses that have stood and drawn that line in the sand and said, we are going to stand with CRPA. And they have done so by sponsoring us, which makes live streams like this and a lot of efforts that CRPA is going to be taking in 2024. It makes it so that those things are possible. So shout out to them. I guess we threw a curveball at our guys behind the camera, but it looks like they got the Min video. So Jacob, if you want to roll that, go ahead and roll it. Here we go. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I'm little too, so.
Do I need to pick this up? There's no way to not believe
And I assume this is all going to the Senate leadership and all that too.
He's
On the
literally
night
talking
of
about
May
the Senate
2nd,
leadership with
2023,
policemen.
California Senator David Min was driving from a downtown Sacramento hotel to his place of residence. Officer Kummerfeld and his partner, Officer Blanchard of the California Highway Patrol, observed the senator's vehicle traveling without headlights on during dark hours. They followed him for several blocks before observing him stop at a traffic light. Senator Min proceeded to drive through the intersection while the traffic light remained red. It was at this point that the officers knew they could no longer allow the senator to be a menace on the streets.
One of the things I think you all should know too
Officer
is that
Kummerfeld recognized the senator.
both of these CHP officers that are going up there is the CHP's job to protect the senators and assembly members in Sacramento. So this was so egregious that they didn't side with the assembly member or senator. They took a VIP to task.
Wow.
And that's why, like, he totally exceeded, because it had been something minor. So they asked him to step out of the vehicle. Just wants to make sure he's safe to
The
drive.
senator was then escorted out of the vehicle for field sobriety tests. The officer noted that the senator displayed a lack of smooth pursuit with his eyes and an obvious early onset of nystagmus in both eyes. Nystagmus is when eyes noticeably jerk when they are moved to one side. This can indicate that a suspect is under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
I had a Coors Light, and then I had liver on I don't remember what
Okay, well, I mean, Jacob, if you
This
want to,
test
I guess,
required
fast
the
forward through a
senator
little
to
bit of this. So it
estimate
looks like they're
passage of
going
30
through a
seconds
field
with his
sobriety
eyes
test.
closed. You take 9 heel-to-toe steps, turn around, and take another 9 heel-to-toe steps.
Yeah, keep going. We'll get to the part where, right here. So they've now handcuffed him.
breath thing in my left pocket and chapstick in my right pocket. Sorry.
So they're searching him. And now, here's the sergeant speaking to the senator.
And I'm not trying to like, you guys do a great job.
Huh.
You're doing a good job. Unfortunately, when they call me out, sergeant, I have to jump, which is no matter who it is.
Well, I guess it got out.
Yeah. Now on the way to county jail.
115, man. I couldn't remember. How many drinks is that usually?
So the math that we usually do, at least like the easy math, is about every drink is about .02 or .015.
Oh, man, I got the...
But, you know, certain drinks are more, you know, if you're taking a shot, generally people are pouring,
Yeah, I guess I'm little too, so...
so everything kind of has a little bit of
There just seems to be
factor in.
a general essence about him that he's sort of above the law. And I don't know, is this sort of an epidemic of being a politician?
Yeah, this is Sacramento. A lot of these politicians think that they're higher than the Supreme Court, higher than everything. And this is part of what's going to play out tonight in that battle for the seat that David Min, being honest, going into this, prior to this happening, was considered to be the shoo-in to fill in for Porter. But because of this mistake, the electorate in his district in 47 have looked at this and taken it very seriously. The Democratic Party threw a bunch of money in to oust him. And so this is probably the end of his political career.
Wow. Well, I guess what can be hopeful is the fact that the Democrat Party thought that the constituents would take this seriously. You know, and I mean,
Well, and they didn't at first. At first, I mean, we can end the video now, but
well, but how many situations have we seen within politics of things just getting swept under the rug? Obviously, something like this became so egregious where they felt like they had to start throwing money behind somebody else.
Well, they had to, because one of the things, if you notice, and this was a great video that our technical crew put up there, Jacob and Kurt were doing a great job. One of the things that they put up was prior to things like, Cop Cam Nation and other groups like this that have got these videos and put them out there because they can grab them legally. What you saw the sergeant, like I said, the CHP is the people that protect the state police, to protect the assembly, protect the governor, protect the state senators. And the sergeant out there says, hey, when I get called out, I get called out for the VIPs. I get called out to try to keep this quiet, to get you in and out as fast as possible, to try to keep the media away. So in other words, what he pretty much says, my job is to make sure the public doesn't know about this.
Right.
But thanks to technology, thanks to the groups, this got out there. And once the Dems realized it got out there and started to see the reaction in the district, and then, Scott Bodley had to mention DUI Dave like once or twice. Of course, the newspaper media was like, DUI what? And then, that information got pulled out. And then, even the Capitol, many people inside the hallways were like, oh, there goes DUI Dave. He had to walk the walk of shame a few times. He did it to himself, so I don't feel bad about that at all. But now what this did was it caused the Dems had already invested in David Min. Then they had to invest in Joanna Weiss to try to secure one of those positions so it wouldn't be an all-Republican race. And they've had to expend millions of dollars
Yeah, it's like trying to
in a
kickstart
primary.
a bike halfway through the race.
And that's money that they don't have for other key races in the
Right.
state of California. So in many ways, this is a winning proposition for people that want to see some of these places be flipped.
Well, hopefully a good outcome there. Kurt, why don't you go ahead and bring us to the... so I guess we can round out the U.S. Senate. Are both Senate seats up for grabs, or is only one?
No, it's only one Senate seat is up for grabs. So this is what happened in that Senate race. You had Feinstein, who had not passed away when this all started down. It started back in January, if you can believe it, of a year ago, way before it should ever happen. And what happened was you had Katie Porter come out of the blocks and say, hey, I just made it to Congress, but guess what? I'm going to leave that congressional seat and I'm going to run for Senate. Her goal was come out first with the support of her mentor, Elizabeth Warren, out of Massachusetts, and get the campaign dollars rolling in. And to Katie Porter's credit, she did do a lot of really good fundraising, started grabbing it. At that point, Adam Schiff was like, wait a second. I was politely waiting for Feinstein to either retire or pass. Feinstein didn't say anything about, how dare you, Katie Porter. Nobody issued anything from Feinstein's office. So then immediately Adam Schiff said, oh, by the way, Katie Porter's not the only one running. I'm now running. And the key to that was what I tried to explain in an earlier video with you was just those two acts then opened up their seats. So then you had David Min saying, I'm leaving my Senate seat to run for this seat.
Right.
You had Anthony Portantino going, I'm leaving the Assembly to run for that seat. Then you had people in those now leaving other seats. And so that created this blockchain effect of groups of people now running for open seats to the point of when Kurt, who none of you can see on the camera that helps us run the politics here, we were looking at the 13,000 plus races statewide, from everything from fire districts and dog catchers all the way up to the U.S. Senate. There were literally thousands of seats that were open to the last minute that nobody had even put the hat in for, because it's created such an open mess where literally people could, for very few dollars, jump in a race and pretty much win it as the only person on the ballot, and now have their feet wet in a political office that they could start to migrate up, which is what the Democratic Party has been very effective at for like the last 25 years, is doing that, getting these people in, looking how they do in those positions, and then building that farm team up, where a lot of people are like, well, who wants to sit on a water board, a school board, or this board? Well, you do if you want to become the mayor of a city or an assembly member or a senator, because that's your key to the credential.
Well, the domino effect, I'm sure, was a wonderful thing for you and Kurt to have to go through. We're going to see how some of those play out today and then into November. Kurt, why don't you go ahead and bring up the state assembly map? Again, just to round out the U.S. Senate, there is one seat or one term up for grabs, and then there is the finishing of Dianne Feinstein's term also that's going to appear on the ballot. This is what the California Assembly looked like after 2022. Again, similar notion. You've got a blue west coast with a lot of land in the east that ends up being red. What are we looking for as far as the California Assembly is concerned? This is two-year terms as well. Are all of these seats up for grabs?
Yes, all the seats are up for grabs, but one of the things that we have to be very careful is this map positions red and blue, and it'd be very easy for a lot of our listeners tonight to say, well, all the blue are anti-2A, and that's not true. Some of those blue seats in there are definitely pro-2A and vote with us all the time. So it's not quite as stark as it looks, but it's stark enough that we have to realize they do have a supermajority, because the one thing you can't see on that map is when you get down to LA area, it looks all kind of bluish white, and that's because there's like a ton of districts in there that give them that. Part of this, though, I'm going to tell you, comes from our own community, because here's what's interesting. Let's just look at that little cluster down there on the map that is, LA County, and you can see the kind of the islands off. So when you look at that map, you're like, well, Kevin, there ain't many gun owners there. And it'd be very easy to say that. But here's what's funny. Let's just take hunting license as a demographic. So you look at the state of California, and I can tell you, the really cool X zones, not in Southern California. Those are up in NorCal. They're up in that area like above Sacramento, a few that are east of Sacramento, but like look at, like the cut across San Francisco, they're pretty much the majority of them up north.
Yeah.
Like the prime hunting area. But do you know what county has the most licensed hunters in the state?
All right, so this is actually going to show my prep, because this is something that you've mentioned to me before, and I have never let it go. I've actually used it as an example in some of the lectures that I've done, but it's LA County, right?
It's LA County. So to go, wait a second. Come again, Rick? Yep, that's right, folks. More hunting licenses that are sold to LA County than anywhere else in the state. And here's what's interesting is that means there's a lot of gun owners in LA County. It's getting those gun owners to vote. And it's one of the things that we've been talking about tonight. We've talked about on a lot of videos, but a lot of our people don't. And we know that. For the most part, gun owners are very honest people. And so when they call in all upset because an assembly bill gets passed they don't like, and they want to yell at me and the legal staff or whoever about it, one of the first questions our operators always ask is, Are you a member? No. Did you vote in the last election? No.
Yeah.
And yes, they did. They did vote, because when they didn't vote, they voted for what they got.
Well, right. Just like you were mentioning in the Capitol, sometimes when we're looking at a specific bill, just getting somebody to not vote is just as good as getting a vote for. I think a portion of it also is just the prominence of the gun debate or Second Amendment culture within the actual vote itself. Like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of people in California that are nightstand gun owners. When it comes to the political discourse, maybe the Second Amendment isn't as high on their priority list and isn't going to outrank somebody as they have other political leanings that would vote towards somebody who's anti-Second Amendment. I think with that, at least in my experience, what comes with creating prominence in that is just education. The more that you're educated about something, the more that you're able to feel about it, the more strongly you're able to feel about it, that prominence comes up and allows it to become more prominent than other things. So I think that's another huge insight into what we're trying to do here when it comes to educating people on Second Amendment rights, how people in California will continue to be affected by anti-Second Amendment legislation.
Well, I think it comes down to a really simple thing that I think you and I are more than qualified to talk about. So I'm actually going to find a way to bring something that's very near and dear to our hearts into this debate tonight. Hockey.
Sure.
So, Kevin, I don't think you're going to have a problem saying this, but you're a
Ducks fan.
And I'm a
Kings fan.
Kings fan. And we actually went to a game with both of our teams playing.
I don't want to talk about it.
I know, we're not going to. But other than the point of, that was a fun evening because we both loved the sport. And there were people from other teams, which you and I kind of wondered, like, what the heck are you doing here when you have a Chicago Blackhawks jersey on? But the point is, while there's jest and fun made, everybody in that stadium was all about hockey.
Sure.
I could go to an Islanders game. I could go anywhere in the country where there's a hockey team, and it's like, you love hockey. It's not like, yeah, I may get razzed because I'm a Kings fan. You might get razzed because you're a Ducks fan. Keeping in California, a Sharks fan. But at the end of the day, if somebody said, oh, we want to disband the Sharks because we hate hockey, guarantee you, every other hockey fan in the state of California nationwide would be like, no.
No, because it's bad for the game.
Yeah, no, you're not doing that. This is an issue that I think we're seeing a great transition within the 2A community. When I first came to work for CRPA, it was like duck hunters didn't give a rat's rear end about deer hunters. Deer hunters didn't give a rat's rear end about three gunners. Three gunners didn't care about target. Like, everybody was in their own little team.
Right.
But now our community has finally started to realize three truths. One, an attack on any member of the team is an attack on everything. The second thing they've realized is, oh, Kevin, we have members of the team that we didn't even realize are part of the team, like farmers own guns. As you said earlier, our good friend, a shout out to CCA Cal, who represents the coastal fishermen out there. They're gun owners. There's people that own motorhomes, equestrians, like the list goes on and on and on. And it's such a diverse cross-section of this state. We have organizations like Asian Pacific American Gunners Associations, ones for people who are of African American descent, others that don't want to be called that, they're just black gun owners. We have ones that are based on religious preferences. I mean, everything. It is so diverse, and all of them are starting to come together and saying, attack on any one of us, you attack the whole house.
Well, and the benefits that you see when you see that unity is a much stronger force that ends up being presented, right? And that's why days like today become important, because if that is important to everybody as a unit, we can change some of these seats. So coming back to the assembly map here.
And I do want to touch on this. This is why Senate Bill, we have it up there, but we have this Senate Bill 1160 that we've been talking about. Part of what that bill is from Anthony Portantino is a bill of intimidation. Why? Because he got told two different numbers. He got told by DOJ, we know where there's roughly 2.8 million firearms in California. But then he got told by ATF of, well, look, buddy, there's a lot more firearms than that in California.
Yeah,
we know that. And so your idea that those only belong to like 1 million people, try 8 to 9 times that amount. And that includes with the mass migration out of California, because you also picked up a bunch during the pandemic. And all of a sudden he's like, wait, there's how many? And he's probably had some staffers, I know of at least one who's listened to our videos, who she's like, there's more. He wants to intimidate that group to silence them. He wants to get them in a position where they're like, well, I can't speak out, because if I speak out, then he knows I have guns. If he knows I have guns, I have to register them. I have to pay fees. Screw that. I'm not going to do that, so I'll just be quiet. That's his win.
Yeah.
Instead, you got to stand up, because look, folks, no matter where that's been tried in the world before, and we could spend a 3-hour live talk on that with history professors, it's always went the wrong direction. We have the smartness of knowing what happened historically. We have the wherewithal, better technology than ever, to stand up and fight. And that's part of what tonight's about, and part of what November's about, is standing up and fighting back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to continue to fight this legislation as we continue to mention in our videos. And hopefully we can start pushing back today with the vote, which, by the way, guys, it's almost 8 o'clock, which means the ballot boxes in your area are about to close. We just went over this California Assembly map. Maybe we can visit the California State Senate map when we come back. But we are going to take a short break, guys. The numbers are going to start coming in. This is the meat and potatoes of this stream. This is why we are here talking, so that we can see how this is going to play out, see what the path is going to look like going toward November in the general election. But for now, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with you. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the first CRPA live stream. We are now into hour 3. It is 8 o'clock on this Super Tuesday. The polls have closed. The numbers are gonna start racking in. Again, my name is Kevin Small. This is Rick Travis, who is the legislative director for the California Rifle and Pistol Association. So Rick, I guess before we start getting into the numbers, and I also want to talk about the voter guide, but before we get into that, let's just go ahead and round out the last of these maps. We've got the California State Senate map up right now. Pretty sparse as far as the red is concerned. How many of these seats are up for grabs in this election, and how many of them are not?
So half of them are. All the odd numbered districts are up for grabs. And then a couple of years from now, then the even ones come up. So it's always 50% of the Senate runs, and then it's 100% of the Assembly runs in each election.
Okay, but definitely something important that we have, or I mean, specifically you have to deal with up at the Capitol. Any races in particular that you've got your eye on for the state Senate?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at a couple of those races as we start to break it down. We'll probably go through some of the Assembly seats. I mean, they're already projecting Trump and Biden for taking the state of California. for the respective. That's not a surprise on the presidential level in this primary in this state. So it's really going to come down to the national election being watched is obviously the Senate, which has 2 elections within it, one to fulfill the remainder of Feinstein's term, which would be to the end of this year, and then the other one, who would take over for the next full term of it. So we'll see how that starts to come in as polls start to break in. There's a lot of predictions. This would either be a Shiff Porter, which was the early predictions. Now, there's a lot of people that say it's a Shiff Garvey, and that Garvey could actually possibly win the fill in the remainder of the thing. So he could, hypothetically, be the, if he lost the November election, could be hypothetical and won that one, he could be hypothetically the shortest U.S. Senate term from California.
Well, while we talk about the state races and the numbers as they come in, we do want to keep the national elections in mind. Jacob, is the national election up on the screen? If you can, yeah, go ahead and put that broadcast up. Maybe we can just have that on in the background so that we can see what's going on in other states. Of course, we are going to be focusing primarily on the state of California as far as those races go. But for now, Rick, while these numbers are just starting to come in, I think we just saw California on the national side of it is at 0%.
Right.
Like you mentioned, they are predicting Trump. If you guys didn't know, California is a closed election, which means, like I stated earlier, Republicans are voting on a Republican ballot, Democrats are voting on a Democrat ballot, independents are voting on an independent ballot. As far as the delegates are concerned, it's winner takes all. So
Correct.
Unlike other states where you might see some delegates go one way, some delegates go on another based off the percentage, in California, when it comes to something like the presidential election, it is winner takes all. And right now they're projecting that to be Donald Trump for the Republican Party and Joe Biden for the Democrat Party.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember here for everybody is in each of these different parties, whether it's the Independent Party, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s We the People Party, any of those, Kennedy for his party will be the default person running as president. Duh, he created that party.
Right.
You know, for Trump, I think it's no shock. He is going to be the Republican. Again, no shock, Biden. However, if you look at the polls, they're coming out of several of the primary states today on Super Tuesday. The question was asked, if, I know like North Carolina just had their poll up there, like if Trump was convicted, how many of you would still vote for him? It was overwhelming. 2/3 of them would still vote for him for president, and we know he could be there. We also know that on the Biden side of it, if for some reason he falters and doesn't stay in, they've got several people, including the governor of this state, who has been waiting in the wings. I mean, it's no shock to any of us that Gavin Newsom will be a presidential contender in 28 because he will have turned out from the governor's office in 2 years. So he's already been working on those presidential contentions. But I will bet you that dollar that we bet back and forth that if something happens and the president doesn't make it through the end of his Democratic convention, that Newsom will definitely be in the bloodbath for who would take over for president.
And that is definitely something on the national stage that we are looking forward to, just as far as how it's going to play out. There are so many theories out there right now of the way that this could go down. And I hate to say the term conspiracy theory, especially because within the community, so many of them become true. I think it's a disservice to call them conspiracy theories.
No,
But
these are hypothetical theories of things that could happen that everybody's looking at.
Right.
What's not hypothetical, though, Kevin, is that the CRPA has invested a great number of people, including the people that we want to thank that are watching us tonight. But we have done a great job of covering elections from some of the lowest seats in terms of popularity in California all the way up to the top. Those pages will be updated over the next couple of days. My staff will be working around the clock to get that done. They've already started tonight. As stuff comes in, we'll be making some changes on endorsements based on how elections play out, and dialing in to like only one person in each race, because we'll want to focus that energy. A lot will go into that. But as we start to look at that, one of the questions that a John Ball asked in our chat. And so, yes, we are looking at questions that come up in the chat. And the guys are trying to feed those to us, especially during this hour. But one of them was, what about judges? And Kevin, we get asked this all the time. So judges are like school board members. It's hard to know where they're at. We do not have the resources. There is a group called the Craig Huey group that does do that. They dedicate themselves totally to watching judges. We have a partnership deal with them. So where they have judges that are known to be 2A supporters, are known to be anti-2A, which would be an F grade, they feed those to us, and those are broken down on our voter guide that's found on our website under programs, campaigns, and elections. So you can go down and find those.
I guess I also wanted to give a shout out here. You know, a lot of things go into making an election guide, or at least this is what I've come to understand and learn throughout the process of working for CRPA. You guys, this isn't necessarily just staff that's contributing towards these. Your chapters are out there in your local areas, getting information on candidates, feeding it to CRPA, making those relationships tangible so that we can get the surveys out to those campaigns, we can grade those surveys, and we can also grade them based off of information that's gathered from within the community. I can't thank the chapters and the people that have communicated with us enough for helping us build this voter guide. It's only going to continue to grow as the program continues to grow. But how vast exactly is our voter guide as it stands right now as compared to previous elections?
It's the most comprehensive we've ever had. We reached out to over 13,000 candidates. Now, obviously, a great majority of them never responded back. Some of that was due to, there's honestly people that declared themselves running for an office. They have no way to get in contact with them. They don't publish their numbers, any contact information. So we attempt several ways to reach out, and if we hear nothing back, that's what it is. That's where chapter programs and a lot of our volunteers in different places have been great, because they're like, oh, I know this person, know that person. We were able to reach out through a third party, get in contact with the candidate or through their campaign people and get the information back, and then we publish that. Part of it is us, we keep track of voter records at the city levels on up. So obviously when there's an ordinance that comes against the Second Amendment, we see who votes which way and make notes of that, so we have that for future elections, so we can use that. So that also goes into the matrix.
And just to clarify, that could be at a board of supervisors meeting. That could be at a school board meeting.
City council
that
meeting.
could be at a city council meeting. So
Fire district meeting.
Right. All of those records are being kept. It's not necessarily just something where a survey is sent out, a survey is returned, those 30 questions are graded. There's a lot more that goes into this. There's a lot more hands in it than people may realize. And it's just really not necessarily an easy thing when you have such a big geographic area with such a diverse group like California is, to actually create a comprehensive voter guide like that.
Yeah, so we do it on a pretty tight budget, pretty shoestring compared to most. I mean, just to give you an example, the people that did the same thing my office did in New Jersey has the staff 5 times bigger than us and a budget way bigger than ours and a state way smaller than ours by multiple folds. So yeah, right. It's kind of ridiculous, but that's a great question. We also had someone ask, when is Capitol Day? And so Capitol Day, we're going to be making the formal announcement. It's coming up here in a couple of months. If you wish to take part in Capitol Day, there is a process for that. We would love to have you up there, but we're taking people that have been well versed in the topics that we're going to be pushing. And so to become part of that, we ask that you reach out to us at contact@crpa.org. That's contact@crpa.org. And then put in the subject line, I want to go to Capitol Day. And then we will get that and get back to you.
Let's actually talk about that right now. When is Capitol Day is one thing. Can we just talk about the origins of Capitol Day? Because this is actually a pretty good story, a pretty prominent story now, and a huge precedent setter for CRPA and the firearms community in general. For those who don't know, CRPA did do a Capitol Day last year where we got, maybe was it 35 people from within the community and a couple of teams to go and visit dozens of legislators' offices in April of last year?
Yeah. So
what exactly was it that led up to that? Just the unprecedented idea of doing it. right? And then actually carrying out, and then the after effects that you being up in the Capitol saw.
So years ago, like I said, when I was doing some work for a couple different members of the legislature, I would see Capitol Days all the time. I helped out with a couple of Capitol Days that dealt with community colleges coming up and assembling, and saw how effective those were to have conversations, and sometimes made certain politicians that might not have agreed with some of the educational policies feel uncomfortable when they're sitting there looking at the people. At that time period, we had a lot of single moms trying to return back to school and get jobs that could take better care of their kids and stuff like that. Some people that came out, veterans out of the first Gulf War. And so when those people showed up at the Capitol on those Capitol Days for community college education, it was a game changer. So when I came to work for CRPA, I brought it up. And the first time I brought it up, it was like, to quote the old term, amongst many 2A groups, not just CRPA, went over like a fart in church, to be blunt. And I got told, can't happen, shouldn't happen, got told a whole bunch of things. I tried to bring it up about 5 years ago when I was doing a lot more work in the hunting community and said, hey, this would be a really great idea. And got told no, because one of the problems is, you have 8 people that are doing the right thing, and you get that one person that goes out there and starts flipping people off and throwing stuff wearing a 2A shirt, and that's what the media focuses on.
Of course.
And then that's what the whole event gets labeled at. So a lot of people that were very, very afraid of it, and I chose last year, April 19th, which was a significant day because it's the day that I argue that British citizens ceased to be British citizens and became Americans, because that's the anniversary of Lexington and Concord, when we said, no, you can't take away our gun rights here in the colonies. And we became Americans that day. So wasn't advocating for violence. That wasn't the key, but was remembering what that was. It was really uniquely interesting. We actually had appointments with 35 different members of the legislature. And it was only one member. I'll do a shout out. It was to Senator Sierrato's office. They're like, oh, we know why you picked this date. And told us to bid. We walked in the office, and I smiled and I said, well, at least one of you got it. And that was cool. But it was a great time because we had groups that were mixed, diverse, both in ages and genders and colors. We had people that went in and talked about what it was like in their culture. We talked about CCWs. We talked about competitive shooting sports. We talked about so many of those items. And we didn't have any major win that day, but what it did do, Kevin, was it set the course that this year, when everything first started to kick off for the new season, I got a call in November from 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans said, are you doing Capitol Day again this year? Yeah. Our offices would like to help sponsor part of that, take the people to come down onto the Assembly and Senate floors, get their pictures taken, and let us help you get into some more offices and get some more appointments. Let's make this a bigger deal, because that was really good. And a couple of those offices haven't always been friendly towards us, but it was a move, and it was also a move that several people said, hey, we need to refirm some things up. So there's been some significant changes from that. We have some of our people last year that are returning to help lead more groups. And so we're opening it up and we're expanding it. And I'm really excited about what it's going to look like.
Well, I guess just an overview, and this is really what's so amazing. Like, you talk about some of the specifics and the changes that we could potentially make in the future seem limitless when you see that sort of reaction from a legislature that's not necessarily friendly to the cause. However, when you step back from 50,000 feet and you just kind of start with a community who hasn't been doing this, you start with organizations that don't necessarily think that it can be done. You kind of take the risk, and there are always risks when you do this, or when you do things like this. I can tell you just from being part of the work in this of setting it up, the community was kind of shocked. It was not easy finding people who wanted to go up just because they had never seen it done before,
right.
From within this community with
we had our fair share of doubters, that was
yeah,
for sure.
A little bit of skepticism there, but to have such a great reaction, and then the outreach this time has been instantaneously overwhelming. of people who want to go again, of new people who want to go. This is truly a landmark thing that we've got in the making. More organizations are looking towards this. More legislators are looking toward it. So
Well, I think
a
it
lot
was-
of a lot of potential there.
I think the other thing is, it's one thing for me to show up on a video with you, and I enjoy when you have me on, but, people are like, oh, yeah, that's the legislative director saying that. But it's a totally different thing when we had regular, everyday people go back to their chapters, their gun ranges, their gun clubs, their school teams, and say, hey, he's not joking. This is what it's like to talk to an anti-2A Democrat. This is what it's like to talk to a weak Republican. This is what it's like to talk to a Democrat who does believe in the Second Amendment and a Republican that believes. That was incredible. And also what was incredible for me is, there will be a time that will happen, sometime next 20 years, that I won't be in this position. I won't be here. And so part of leaving a legacy is who's going to come up in that next generation. That's something a lot of people out there sometimes seem depressed about. Do not be depressed. I mean, 3 youth that I used in the Capitol last year, of those 3 youth, 2 of them had their entire lives set out before them and now have been in contact with me all year. I want to go back to Capitol Day because you know what? I think I might want to do your job one day. And I think that's amazing. By the way, they're not white guys. Both of them are young ladies who are incredibly smart, incredibly adept, and they're coming back to lead teams this year. And so I've got a lot of hope, and it's one of the things that keeps me going, keeps me fighting, keeps me looking at some of you out there and saying, quit being negative Nancy's, because we've got a strong young millennial and Gen Z group coming up that they want to get into the thick of this fight.
Well, it definitely keeps my motor going because it's kind of like like a citizen's most true form of advocacy, right? We here at CRPA are trying to, and guys, just so that you know, CBS is the stream that we've had on here for a little bit. We're going to be looking into other potential things to have on in the background.
We're going to go to Fox. CBS was covering California. Fox wasn't. Now Fox is, so we're moving to Fox.
All right. Well, yeah, Jacob, when you get a chance, go ahead and switch it over to there. You want to talk about mainstream media, guys? The reason why we're on YouTube is to kind of counter that, but we did want to give you an option to look at the national races going on. But back to this, Rick, you have kind of your truest form of advocacy here, with the potential of creating another generation of advocacy, has a lot of promise. And there, we have the one-click politics. We have tools that we're trying to bring into this that are going to help us advocate in the future, especially when a lot of these bills are going through. But when you're able to get a group of people in front of a legislator when they're not in their home arena of a committee meeting or whatever, and actually have a dialogue with them, potentially change their mind on something, that's really what keeps me going as far as the advocacy side is concerned. So how helpful does that end up being to you? What are the lasting effects that you have seen from last year's Capitol Day to now?
Well, one of the effects that I was hoping for that has started to take root and starting to grow is once they realized they could go to the big office, because that's what it is, that's the Capitol offices for each of these legislators, and we would walk out in the hallway and debrief for a couple of minutes before we go to the next one. I would ask them, and it was funny, the first couple, they were like very nervous, but by the time we got to the third or fourth appointment before lunch, they were on cruise control. They really were. There was very little for me to say other than, hello, assembly member or senator so-and-so. Oh, hey, how's it going, Rick? Yeah, these are, and then they just took off. And I was just there to field a question here or there, which was great. One of my most relaxing days, actually, in the Capitol. But what was even better is then at the end of the day, if you'll remember, we debriefed them in Capitol Park before they all went to go home. And several of them said, it's easier at the local office, isn't it? Yeah, that's the B team. And they were like, so we could help out. And that's one of the things I've been telling them. Yeah, if when we're fighting a bill, especially now because you can't call in like you used to during the pandemic, yes, you calling into the local office, you showing up at the local office, you saying like, I don't want my assembly member doing this. You saying, hey, when my assembly member's in town, we would like to meet with them. setting up those appointments. Those are things that cause members not to vote. You got to realize something. These are politicians. Their job to them is getting reelected. So I tell people all the time, what you want to be able to do is give that politician the place to hang their hat. So if you're a Dem and you don't want to tick off the majority leader, here's what you say to him. Look, dude, maybe in your district, everybody's like cool with this. But in my district, I've got twice a month, I've got people wanting appointments with me on this subject. Do you have that? Nope. I have people calling me all the time on this subject. Do you have that? No. I want to stay in office. So guess what? I'm not voting on this bill. That's a win for us. It's the win for the local people, but that's how politics is played. And you and I see it all the time. I mean, often I walk in, it's not a complaint, but I walk in, yeah, I got to take a deep breath because, I got to walk in on a bill like 1160 this year. I already know that of those 60 seats in the audience, there's going to be like 5 for the 8 of us representing the Second Amendment, and the rest are going to be worn by red shirts of women in their 60s and 70s that largely represent moms that demand action because they're going to flood it. And they're all going to claim to be volunteers, even though they're paid to be up there, have paid hotel rooms. These women do not have enough money in their Social Security budgets to pay for all of that.
Something that we actually encountered when we went up to Capitol Day, overhearing a conversation about some activists that were mentioning that they were paid to be there.
Right.
And assuming that day or the next day they were going to be in the Capitol with their slogan shirt on, advocating for their cause. And you guys, these are great people that went to advocate for you up in the Capitol. They paid their way, and they went on their dime to advocate for a cause that they believe in for themselves and for you. There's not really much more than you can ask for from a person, which is why I end up being so passionate about it, because that advocacy, that comes from the soul. You know what I mean? These people were not paid to be there. They did this themselves. Obviously, they used CRPA as a vehicle to get into the offices. Which is our part in that game, but they did it themselves, and if that's not a good sign of what might be to come with future generations and future Capitol days, I don't really know what is.
No, I think it's a great deal that we have going on. We'll have some more questions coming up. I know we have Fox News up there, so hopefully that's making everybody a little bit more happy.
Well, yeah, I do see Kurt's actually filling in our U.S. State Senate map. You guys, pretty soon we should have maybe some vote tallies coming in. It looks like, at least as far as the U.S. State Senate is concerned, Kurt, can you actually? I'm sorry, U.S. Senate, not U.S. State Senate. It looks pretty similar to the prior map. It looks like San Bernardino, as well as some of the central counties, as well as some of the northeastern counties, are starting to clock in red, while you see some of the central coast of California clocking in blue. Obviously not a whole lot of the percentage of votes is actually in yet, so we still got a long way to go. But how about that?
So wait. We got a vote tally coming in right now. So Adam Schiff is currently leading. Kurt, this is the general, right? Okay. So Schiff is leading at 35%. Garvey is at 30%. And Katie Porter is at 15%. So what it's looking like is that if these numbers hold through the rest of the evening, that this race will be an incredible blowout. Katie Porter will not be seeking re-election in this next term in her congressional seat. She'll have been a one-termer. And it means that Garvey will have ran an effective enough campaign to make this a two-person race for the U.S. Senate in November.
So can you actually, this is a little bit more of a general question that I've always been curious about. You have some districts, or in the presidential elections, some states. How do these broadcasts actually do these well, they're not necessarily predictions. How do they call these races? Sometimes you see them called at 50% of the vote. Sometimes you see them called at 10% of the vote.
There's certain signifiers in politics. I have this quote from Lyndon Johnson. It's the only Lyndon Johnson quote I have. And it's America's national pastime isn't baseball, it's politics. And to a degree, there are more rules and regs than in any of the other sports on this. that half the people don't understand, and people pontificate on it. But what we're always looking at in this is how this plays out. And so right now, we're looking at how much money has been wasted by the Democrats. I mean, you had three strong contenders. You had Barbara Lee out of the Bay Area. So one of the things that when I look at this is Barbara Lee should be carrying a large percentage of the African American vote in California. She should be carrying a large percentage of the Bay Area vote. She's held a great position for a long time, but as these numbers keep changing, like Kurt's writing them up again, so now you got Porter and Lee staying right in the 15-7%, but you have Garvey that's fluctuating between 27 and 30, and you've got
Shift that's pulling away with it.
Pulling away. But look, all Garvey has to do with 27% of the vote in, Garvey just has to hold that. And so when we get to probably the 50, 60, they'll call it Shiff and Garvey, because the odds of those number of votes in a state this big of being recouped by either Porter or Lee would be gone.
What I've always been curious about is it dependent on which precincts have already reported versus which precincts they can assume will go one way?
Yeah, some of it's that. Some of it is, you have precincts like take down here in Southern California, Camp Pendleton is a large military complex. San Diego has the naval base down there. You have up in Ventura County, you have Vandenberg Space Force Base now. So you have some of those. Travis Space Force Base up in the Solano area. So on bases, the military tends to vote slightly more conservative than the mainstream does in the area. So when the military votes being counted, a lot of times that's taken in. We have major universities, tends to shift the other way. So all those demographics are studied consistently. San Bernardino County, that when you look at it, if you were to key that in around the Cal State San Bernardino, that would be solidly blue because it's at the university level. And so, no shock when you look at LA and you have UCLA and Loyola Marymount and, some of the other ones that tend to be a little bit more liberal. You're going to see, Cal State LA, you're going to see more of that kind of a vote. So the modeling is different for each different county, but like Modoc, which is up there in the top right-hand corner, like that's not going to change. It's a fairly conservative base. It's solid Republican. So in some of those areas that are solid, it makes it very easy for them to call that county in one direction or another. You also have some races like in the California State Senate, Brian Dahle, who ran against Newsom for governor. Brian Dahle is terming out, but his wife Megan Dahle is moving from the assembly into his position. Dahleys are a powerfully influential family in District 1, and so she's going to win that by a landslide. So, I'm not even watching that race that closely. That's like a foregone conclusion. Both sides have admitted that the whole campaign season.
Well, I'm still a little bit curious about this Senate race.
I do want to bring up something about that. The Dahleys are great fundraisers. So here's what you got to realize. When Megan Dahle owns a race like she does, that means she doesn't have to spend a lot of money, right? Which means now she can donate that money to help other GOP members, Republicans, and other districts to help them get across the finish line.
Right.
That's why earlier when I was saying this race for Porter's district, it has Min and Weiss and how much money they spent and how much money Scott Baugh's holding on to, gives them superior numbers to make it through. So long as he doesn't do a David Min stupid item,
right,
he should
And what
win.
you're saying is there could be even more money injected later into those areas. But I mean, keeping an eye on this Senate race. So I think there are a couple things that we might need to consider. First of all, with 27% of the vote, you guys, for this Senate race, you've got Schiff at 37%, Garvey 27%, Porter at 15%, Lee at 7%. You got 4 candidates up there. Only one of them is sympathetic toward the Second Amendment, right? I think we got a pretty good idea of that. I mean,
That's interesting you bring that up, because we reached out to the Garvey campaign, and there was another guy up there, Eric Early, that was running for Senate. So there was actually 5 people in it. Early probably doesn't have very many votes at all, but like 3%. But Eric Early, to his credit, was the only one that signed anything and said where he stood on the Second Amendment. Garvey stayed away from it. Obviously, Porter, Shiff, and Lee, we know where they stand. Their voting records tell us that.
Well, yeah.
So Garvey is an unknown.
Unknown. So I mean, at the very least, it's a
He's
a
not
tactic
Shiff.
I mean, Dianne Feinstein sitting in this seat. Some people don't even really understand why, because it seemed like she didn't know a whole lot about firearms, but was no friend to firearms or the firearms movement in California. But when you look at something like this, you've got Shiff, Porter, and Lee making up a total of, I mean, what's the math on that? 37 plus 15 is 52, plus 7 is 59. When you go to the general election, does all 59% of that end up being on somebody like Shiff, or do you see a little bit more of a delegation between the votes?
Well, it depends. Like everybody wants to assume that the Porter and the Lee votes would break for Shiff, and the early votes would break for Garvey. So if that stayed at that percentage, say 4% for early would go, that'd bring him up to 32, so he'd have roughly third. And Shiff would walk away with, 2/3. But, the vote count is pouring in. We're at 30% right now. Schiff's at 38. Garvey's at 28. Porter's held at 15, and 3.5% now for early. And Lee is still running around 7%. So while that's interesting, long as it stays, I mean, Garvey's outpacing Porter almost 2-1. So if he holds that, Porter, Lee, and early are out. And what I was trying to say was that's a pretty big bruising for Lee, because she is a prominent member of Congress, has been in that seat for a long time. That may cause people to challenge her, and she's vacated that seat. So Lee is not only not going to be in Congress, but wow, that's not good.
Yeah, and I guess let's not forget somebody who was kind of making a name for themselves in Congress, in Katie Porter, would be worth gunk if this holds.
I mean, what we talked about earlier in tonight's live stream, that hypothetical looks to be moving in the direction that we hypothetically said, where she's just not going to be seen in that kind of a position. So this is part of the game of politics too, and this is why our community's got to start looking at this with a very positive attitude. One of the biggest anti-gun people, Porter, is being removed from office.
Yeah.
And most likely going to be replaced by the opposition party in the office she just held. You're looking at Garvey, who was a complete non-politician. He's a retired baseball player, not even recently retired, like a long time retired baseball player, who is now, I mean, that shows you how many people in California are fed up. And Adam Schiff, when this goes to a two-party thing, this is going to be very interesting, because he's done some stuff that has not made him a favorite with some Democrats either. So this is going to be really, really interesting to watch how this develops.
Well, I'd be curious also, Kurt, if you can, look up the Melissa Hurtado race. That's another one that I wanted to keep my eye on, mainly because I remain so snake-bitten from Assembly Bill 28, or was it Senate Bill 28?
So I was told I can't do this song, but my favorite song tonight, if things go right in that district, would something that sounds like, maybe you can help me so we don't violate it. But no.
Perhaps we can both hum it together towards the end of the stream.
I think there's 2 words that you would say.
Hey, hey, hey.
And then from our cast out there,
yell it.
Goodbye.
Yeah. So there you go.
So we just got word, and Kurt, what's the percentage of the vote in right there? Because Melissa Hurtado is currently in 4th place in the race that she is going in. What was the percentage of the vote?
Wait, did I just smile?
Wow. Don't see those very often.
Just to confirm, refresh, it is only 5%. Valadeo.
Okay, still a ways to go.
So Valadeo is at 37.
Salas at 25.
Salas at 25.
Chris Matthews at 23.
Matthews at 23, and Hurtado at at 12.
Can you go ahead and highlight the district that we're talking about here? And guys, if you are just now joining us, we have been streaming since 6 o'clock. The first thing we wanted to talk about was just to get out and get to the vote, but we did end up talking about some legislation that got passed. We're looking at are we looking at the House of Representatives map
That would
right
be
now?
District 20, correct? 22, sorry.
This is
22.
District 22. Somebody who gave us an indication, or at least the gentleman's agreement of politics, that they were going to get a no vote on Assembly Bill 28, ended up voting yes, thereby causing an 11% tax for Californian gun owners. Is now in 4th place in her race, and this is something that we were definitely looking forward to, making a statement to those those legislators.
Yeah, so we can tell them, hey, when you don't tell the truth and you do something, we will help others come and form a coalition to replace you.
Right.
And you will lose everything. And so this is going to be a lot of fun for me to go up the next couple of weeks and go, so where are you at on this vote? And when they say, well, what are we going to do about it? Why don't you go ask so-and-so down the hallway?
So how much would that actually play? I mean, let's say that a
Quite a bit.
conversation goes that way. Is that enough to actually sway somebody to maybe go from a yes vote to a no vote, go from a yes vote to a no vote? How would that actually go?
That's funny you said the same thing twice. But,
Yes vote to a no vote, yes vote to not voting. How about that?
Yeah, probably it would cause some people to, most likely with the right amount of pressure, to say, okay, I just won't vote. I'll sit this one out. I just won't show up.
And of course, a non-vote
Is great because that's one less vote they have to get it across, and that's how we stopped the various forms of AB 28 for 5 tries before on round 6 they got it through because of someone like Hurtado.
Right. Well, that's definitely something to look forward to. And again, what was that at 5% reporting now for the Hurtado race?
Yeah.
Looks like 30% is in for the the federal Senate race. Shiff is at 36%, Garvey at 29%, Porter at 4%. So Porter actually dropped a percentage point.
Bummer.
Garvey ended up picking up a couple. Shiff also dropped one. I'm sure that's a consequence of a specific district.
But that means that Garvey now is officially on a 2-1 over Porter.
Which is definitely a good thing.
Yep.
Again, Porter is somebody who was making a name for herself in Congress, especially on the anti-2A portion of legislation.
Right.
And now it's looking like she's not really going to have a path forward. She's going to have to start over if she wants to continue in politics.
No, and I think tonight's going to be a great night for the 2A community. I've been very positive about this with a lot of people, and one of the reasons I've been so positive is because, folks, as we move forward tonight, you're going to see a lot of people that we got on supported. A lot of these came from, like, I just want to do some shout outs. Ventura, this was an incredible amount of influence we were able to play into that. We ended up with, I think, almost, Kurt, wasn't it everybody that ran for Central Committee? Yeah, everybody in the Central Committee, for the first time in any county, went ahead and filled out our 2A questionnaire, talked with us, and got their voter grades and put that out there proudly. Ventura has been a county which has had a board deal. We also now have District 20, the Fong-Boudreaux race, which Mike Boudreaux's the sheriff there. Vince Fong has been an outstanding person. They're running for the former seat of the Speaker of the House. And Fong is ahead 28 to 26. With 18%, so that's too close to call.
Do you remember, Rick? What were the grades for both of those individuals on the voter guide?
Both of those guys we graded, and both of them we endorsed because we have great relationships with Mike Boudreaux. Been an outstanding CCW sheriff, is outstanding supporter of CRPA. Vince Fong has been outstanding with us in the Capitol. Been one of our greatest allies. Shout outs to both of them. Mike Boudreaux has done an incredible amount of work in the state for gun owners. Vince Fong has done the same thing. He's done an incredible amount of work. In fact, several of the elections in 22 that we flipped by margins of less than 1,000 votes was thanks to the great work of Vince Fong. So this is really a difficult race for me to watch because I actually understand both men. I think both men are great. And what a weird problem to have that you have probably 2 of the top 25 candidates in the state in this,
In the same
and they're in the
district.
same district. Dang it!
Definitely a win-win for the
Yeah.
firearms community when it comes
Yeah.
to replacing
There's no loss there.
Kevin McCarthy's seat. We'll continue to keep an eye on that one as the voter counts continue to roll in. Kurt, could you actually bring up this U.S. Senate map? So we're
Any
this is
questions?
Yeah, the maps, we need to drop it off and then bring it back. So
okay. So we'll drop off the maps and then bring them up. This is just going to be a notification for you guys to understand how the counties are voting for their U.S. Senate seats. So I guess right now, let's go
Do a
ahead.
survey. Ask the.
What?
Trust me.
What?
Do you trust me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask all of you out there. Our staff is monitoring. We had originally planned to sign off at 9, but if you guys would like to see us go to 10, if you chime in for us to go to 10 and we have a big enough outcry to do that, then we will add an extra hour to this live stream.
Yeah, go ahead and leave a comment in the section below. Tell us to go to 10 or no comment at all. Obviously, as these voter counts continue to come in, they're starting to come in already. So how about this? Okay, so I'm getting a notification that they're kind of piling on now. How about this, Rick? Let's go to a quick break. Let's catch some air, and we will come back with a little bit more of the votes coming in and to see how some of these races are shaping out. So, guys, we will be right back. Short 10-minute break, and then we're going to go till 10.
Okay.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Super Tuesday live stream. You are here with us at CRPA. Of course, my name is Kevin Small. This is Rick Travis. He is the legislative director for the California Rifle and Pistol Association. Going into hour 4, we've been we've been hanging out since 6 o'clock. Obviously, our original message, if you hadn't already, get to the polls if you haven't voted already and cast your vote. That's part of our message. That will continue to be part of our message.
But the polls are closed.
All the way up until November. But at 8 o'clock, those polls closed. The ballots started to get counted, and now we are starting to see some of these tallies rack up. We're going to continue and have the national races on the screen here for you. We're going to continue and fill in the maps for the state of California for you as well. But Rick, as far as the talk is concerned, I wanted to focus a little bit on Senator Min and the race that he's in. Currently, you guys, this is District 47. You've got Baugh, who's in the lead with 29.7%. You've got Min right behind him at 29.5%. You've got Weiss at 21.2%. As far as this race is concerned, I just wanted to talk about, other than the DUI with Senator Min that we've already discussed. Can you tell us just some of the legislation that he has brought to California that's been detrimental for the Second Amendment?
He's tried
community?
everything from insurance schemes. He's went after kids with firearms. He's went after CCWs. One of the biggest fights that you and I had was the OC gun show. Trying to remove gun shows both statewide and in Orange County. Many of those have resulted in the loss of millions of dollars to the taxpayer, especially the 2A taxpayer, because you paid for it by your wonderful donations for the litigation fight, but you also paid for it out of your tax dollars. Min was told in all of those testimonies repeatedly, like, this is unconstitutional, it's illegal, you can't do it, and yet they kept doing it. And so as a result, he's cost the taxpayers a lot. When you look at D47, I think one of the things that's important for people to realize is it has been very hard for David Min to raise money. In fact, when you look at it, he's had to go on, and he's got basically $250,000 left in his campaign coffer. And he's currently at 29.53% with 46% of the vote counted in that district. So what does that mean? Well, Scott Baugh has $1.7 million. And we know that Joanna Weiss, that the Democrats put in this race to defeat Min, is currently at 21.22%. That could shift. She could take second, but regardless, that cost the Democrats another $1.5 million. So even if the Dems moved that $600,000 she had left over, which I doubt that would happen, she's going to keep that in her accounts because she's going to run again. Max, I'm probably saying the guy's name wrong, so I apologize, but Ukropina, or Pina, he's got like 158,000. He's not going to be in the race again. This is going to come down to Baugh versus Min. Baugh's going to be able to outpace him financially and remind the voters of everything he's done against the community. You'll see Baugh out. He's pro 2A. He'll be out in the community. He'll be pushing. We have a couple chapters in Orange County that will be promoting him to the community. We'll get him out there, and we will get him across the finish line in November.
So what you're saying is, as far as the coffers or the war chest is concerned, Min versus Baugh, if that is what comes to the general election, even though you kind of have a split in the vote for Democrats right now, the longevity shows a little bit more promise for Baugh as far as getting his name and his message out there and recognition for the general election.
And you have to look at what's going to be happening. I mean, there's city council races in Huntington Beach. If they hold the way that they were looking like they were going to hold earlier today, if you've got some of the other races in that district like Fountain Valley, Newport holding that way, there's an excellent chance that Baugh's going to have the support downstream from him to build him up. and along with the Republicans are going to be able to coalesce around one candidate, pour a lot more money into that. A lot of independents that are tired of what Min's done will pour money into that. And Min is going to be a black eye. And so, I'm kind of happy that he's making it into the final two if he does, because it will be easier to defeat Min than it would have been Weiss.
Well, I got to tell you, when you're talking about somebody like Weiss, you have that saying, the devil is more often better than the one that you don't. Doesn't really get a whole lot worse for the firearms community when it comes to somebody like Senator Min. It seems like he has made attacking the firearms community one of his primary goals of being in the seat that he is in. This in District 47 would probably continue that trend. So when it comes to Min versus Weiss, not necessarily the devil that's better than the one that you don't, but when it comes to a battle in the general election versus Baugh, we definitely want to take some solace in the fact that he's got a war chest. Baugh has a war chest built up, has the potential for more longevity until November.
Let's play this out at a national level. You have in the vice presidency Kamala Harris and a former attorney general on that cabinet, and I won't be mean like the president, but I will call him Becerra, not Beccaria.
Are you talking about when he got up there and called Javier Becerra Javier Baccaria or whatever he did?
But you're looking at realistically in that situation, you have two of the most anti 2A attorney generals in the state's history. You have Bonta, who's going to run for governor or another high-level position. You've got Adam Schiff, no friend of our community, trying to move into the U.S. Senate position. You've got Portantino trying to move into Schiff's position, who is by far the most anti-2A advocate in the state, and Min, who's been one of his lieutenants, trying to move. So any one of those that we can keep out of Washington, D.C. is great. This attitude of a lot of our people of, well, let them go to D.C. because their power will become diluted. That's not necessarily true. And so we need to push back and make sure that we make these people not get those job positions by voting them out. Let's go over to my favorite race, and that would be the D22 that I'm watching tonight.
I actually wanted to ask you a question in something that you were referencing specifically towards money, but we should just go through these really quick. So that one, though, the Min-Baugh race is at 46% in. So that's almost half the ballots that have been counted. Seems pretty solid. Min and Baugh are neck and neck. Then you go to District 22, where Hurtado sits at 17% with 22% of the vote in. Any chances of this changing as it continues to grow?
I don't think so. I think you're going to continue to see Mathis, and this is what's going to be unique. Like if you look at this, when Hurtado is no longer in and Mathis isn't, Mathis's votes will go to Valadeo. So that would right now put, if these numbers held, that would definitely put Valadeo over Salas. But this would be a race that people would look at me and go, well, do you want the Republican or do you want the Democrat? Rudy Salas, solid 2A Democrat, solid. Always voted with us. Sam Paredes, who, I work with in the Capitol, he is the head of Gun Owners of California. Sam and I have a great relationship with Rudy. Rudy's a great man on Second Amendment issues. Valadeo is a great man on Second Amendment issues. So literally for the people of District 22, again, this in a way hurts because we have two strong 2A candidates up there. Hurtado, not strong 2A, and kind of shows in her vote count. There was a lot of grassroots efforts by ag, by hunters, by especially I want to do a shout out to the waterfowl community who got out there and got some really great social media advertising going out, reminding people leading up to this vote. That was incredible. And so that has allowed us to be able to continue to push. We want to continue to push that, gain it going. And this is it's an incredible thing to have.
This definitely is one that was weighing on my heart a little bit. It's great to see somebody like Hurtado actually suffer the consequences of a bad decision. But we also got this Senate race. What is that? 39% in. Garvey has actually picked up a little bit of steam, and Porter has dropped a little bit. So you got Shiff at 37%, you've got Garvey at 29%, and Porter at 14%, with Lee taking in the back end with 7%. So that one looks like it's holding pretty firm. You'll probably see a Shiff-Garvey election in November.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a Shiff Garvey. What's going to be interesting is to see how that 21% that Porter and Lee are splitting, because a lot of those two candidates, their people do not like Adam Schiff. So Steve Garvey has some room to maneuver. Not a lot of room without sacrificing some of the Republican votes that he has, but he has room to maneuver that he could possibly get people in. The biggest thing is going to be if Schiff wins. I'm assuming that, because Kurt hasn't told us differently, that both races, these numbers are holding pretty identical, because there's two races for the Senate, which means that these hold through the night. Then Adam Schiff will be the Senate elect to fulfill Dianne Feinstein's seat, which could be an issue that could go one of two ways. Like, if he doesn't do a lot of good things between now and November in that seat, that could give Garvey what he needs to take it in November. But then again, too, if he gets gifted some really good move that coalesces California voters around him, that could be the end of Garvey's run.
Right. So you guys, as you continue to see this U.S. Senate map filling out county by county, looks a little bit different than the one that we had last. I think that one was in, 2018? However, we're going to continue filling that in. We're going to continue and monitor as the numbers come in. But, Rick, I did have a couple of questions for you. Something that you mentioned when we were
Wait
talking
a second.
about...
On that partial, if you look right now, Schiff is only up by 2% on the partial, which is funny, because what I said earlier, there is been talked about, I should say has been talked about quite a bit, a avenue where Garvey could actually win the remainder of the seat and lose the November
and then that
position.
That would be an opportunity either for Schiff or Garvey, whoever gets in there, to either turn voters off for November or to gain voters for November.
But it could also mean that whoever got that position, that the partial one, would have, I believe, the shortest term ever in office for a U.S. senator from the state.
Well, we'll see as that continues to roll out. But something that you were talking about when we were talking about Senator Minn's race was the cost to the taxpayer. Me personally, I think that this is something that generally isn't talked about enough. I know that CRPA has on its website a landing page specifically dedicated to the blunders of Gavin Newsom and the legislature and what it is costing the taxpayer.
Is under another recall attempt. Just want to point that out.
Again, yeah, he is going through another recall. But from your perspective, I'm just sort of curious. You know, you see a lot of money that's spent by the state government. You see a lot of money that's spent by the federal government, for that matter. You know, something that CRPA does as a service to its members and Californians at large is sue not the legislature, but the state for unconstitutional laws that it has passed. Something that doesn't necessarily get talked about a whole lot, though, is the cost that has on the taxpayer. Can you speak to that a little bit? And can you speak also to just the overall sentiment of the legislators themselves? In your estimation, do they care about this at all because they're playing with monopoly money, or is it something that they have to consider?
I think it's something that they have to consider. And one of the things, just a second, folks. Hour 4, I need some water. I think one of the things that we've got to look at that actually answers that question is when you and I first started working together, I told you when you wanted to know what was going on, what should you follow?
The money.
The money. And so let's talk about that. If Californians really want to take back, Californians need a proposition. A lot of people have lots of weird ideas for propositions. This is what I've been preaching for a better part of a decade. No money from outside the state into state politics. Not talking about the national level. Like, obviously, if you're running for president, that's a different game. But literally, if you did that, you guys have to remember, the legislation I face comes from anti-2A groups. And this is the irony. I get people all the time going, you know what, Rick, I'm going to move to Arizona. Why? because they're more gun friendly. Really? Yeah. Really? Why you keep asking me really, Rick? Because Giffords, who writes half the legislation that we face off, Giffords, who sits in the courtroom against our attorneys in California, is owned and financed by Giffords in Arizona. Like it's an Arizona anti-2A group invading California. If you cut their money from being able to come from Arizona to California, then half the money it pays the legislators to push this legislation would never happen.
But they might exist in Arizona maybe for tax purposes or something like that, since Gavin Newsom and the legislature have kind of run out a lot of businesses from California, a few big ones, running up the state deficit there. But I mean, is that something where they look to a state like New York or California that has a really sympathetic legislature to their cause, where they can start breeding this sort of legislation that can then sweep across the nation? Is that the ultimate goal?
The ultimate goal is to do that. And I think if you look, I publish a report to all your legislative groups up and down the state, do it pretty much weekly. And in that report, you will often see that what we had a year or two ago in our legislature is now being replicated in Colorado, attempted in New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, throughout the western United States. And so that's why I say you can't run from this. You might buy yourself a little bit of time, but you've got to get engaged and get in the fight and keep pushing. We also have to get people motivated, keep people moving. And one of the things I think is highly important in this race is looking at where these are going. The Senate in here is great. People are excited about the national election, but I keep looking at how do we break the supermajority in this state, and how we do it is ground up, but it's also by pushing for different things. People should have the right to vote for different people, and I think if we can break the Democratic Party into two and really start to point out, like, hey, Democrats in the central part of the state aren't the Democrats in the Bay Area, and start, pushing that. Nobody loves to point out all the differences as much as Dems. Well, let's start pointing out the differences. That's funny because the people in the Central Valley don't have the same value system as some of you do in the Bay Area, or some of you do in the LA Basin area, and highlight those things and show them the stuff. And I think one of the things too is we got to start asking the tough questions, Kevin. I just talked to somebody about a hunting issue, but they live in Wilmington down by the docks. I was down there because one of the arguments that we've been making the Catalina deer issue is when you go to the LA Harbor, which I know you've been to, Wilmington's a part of that, there's this beautiful white rock that makes up the breakwater. That white rock comes from Catalina. They literally busted up, put it on barges, brought it over, dumped it in, and we were talking about that. And I looked around and there was all these potholes, and I said, hey, can I ask who you vote for? And he told me it's longtime Democrats. And I said, I grew up for a period of my life in Gardena, and nothing's changed there. It's the same potholes. I said, it's funny what everybody says they can't vote for somebody who's not a Democrat because things get worse. Really? Because at my age, the roads in Wilmington, Lomita, Gardena, here in the South Bay have never improved. And you know what's the one constant? Always ran by Democrats. How much worse could it get if you gave the other side a try?
Yeah.
And he looked, he goes, I've been voting Democrat for 40 years, and that's probably the best argument I ever heard of why I shouldn't.
Wow.
And I was like, but, it's true. It's a simple question, like, are you better? No, then change the leadership.
Right. Well, we should be getting some updates on some of these races soon. I was sort of also curious, and I mean, just talking about how CRPA is a nonpartisan organization, Second Amendment is for everybody. We have talked about some sympathetic legislators that are Democrats who vote for in favor of the firearms community when it comes to this legislation. In your experience, have you ever experienced kind of the reciprocal of that? Or do you see any trends of people who are in the Republican camp who don't necessarily vote on Second Amendment bills or vote against them?
Yeah, Kurt, could you also put up a couple other ones? Let's get D3 and D13 up there. And if we could also get D2 and D45.
Okay. Are you talking for
Congress. So we're going to be looking at a couple other races. I'm going to have Kurt put some numbers up there where you can see them. Kevin, you're going to have to read some of those because they're going to be behind the wall where I can't see. So he's going to put D45 down there, but I can see D3 and D2 where he's going to put them. These are going to be interesting for us. So I wanted to talk about, these are some of the districts up north. 45, of course, is down to south. But looking at these districts, so D45 is part of Orange County and part of LA area. And what this is going to be interesting is we have Michelle Steele, who is running against a couple of, well, actually 4 Dems that divided it up. And Michelle Steele's husband is head of the Republican Party here in California. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what the vote count is in this area because the Dems lined up 4 candidates and they tossed in a couple $1 million, but Michelle Steele is one heck of a fundraiser, buddy.
Well, it looks like as he's writing this up that Michelle Steele, he hasn't given the percentage of votes that came in yet, but Steele is at 51% of the vote with Tran at 18%. So a substantial lead, although again, you have to consider if you have 4 Democrats, that 51% for Steele, which would be made up of Republicans, might be going against a combination of the next 4
Right.
in the general election.
But she still has almost $3 million in cash in hand to go to the general, and only one opponent, Cheyenne Hunt, had $134,000. Everybody had less than $70,000.
So again, okay. So what you're saying is you've got Michelle Steele, who currently has 51% of the vote in District 45, a substantial discrepancy in coffers.
Right.
Looking towards November shows a lot of promise. Not to mention the ties that she has to the GOP
Right.
In general. Looks pretty substantially good going into November, I guess, is the picture that you're trying to paint.
Yeah, so that one's looking pretty safe. D3 is wonderful. This is Kevin Kiley. Now, this is probably one of the most maligned districts. I love Kevin. Loved working with him up in our state capital. He moved to Congress. Has been a very vocal person. But what they did to try to oust Kiley was his district was just like that area up above El Dorado and everything. Now, if you look at it, it goes down the entire backside of the 395.
So, and that's the technical term for that is gerrymandering, right?
Yeah, that'd be the technical term for it, is true. And in that one, they've got Jessica Morse, who's the Democrat. She's got about $600,000 in hand. He's got about $2 million. But right now it's a 51, 46, and 2% race. Smith is which party, Kevin? Is it independent?
Yeah.
So if the independent gets knocked out, that most of the time breaks towards Republicans in that area. So that would give him a 53-46, which is it's a pretty safe lead at that point.
And guys, as these totals come in, you probably, it's almost 9:30, probably start seeing some of these races get called. Just as a reminder, unless they're running unopposed, correct? There are 2 people going to the general election in November. It's going to be the top 2 vote getters. I would imagine as District 47 continues to play out with Baugh and Min, if those 2 continue to grow while Weiss and others continue to fall, the district will probably get called and we'll look for a Baugh-Min election in November. I'm curious, we should be getting an update soon on the Hurtado as well as the Schiff-Garvey.
And where are we at on District 2? So just give me Huffman and Gibbs.
So while he's looking those up, I mean, Rick, as far as the California county map is concerned, is any of this surprising to you, the way that this is shaping out?
No, right now things are looking about where I thought they would look. Looking where the votes are coming for everywhere. I think you got a couple more little counties, one that may flip red or blue up in the north, and then the other one on the back saddle. Obviously, Lake Tahoe's county went blue. That's not a surprise there. I think you have some issues that will play out. We have a fire season that comes up between now and then. So the state's handling of fire and water management. We just had a blizzard come in that packed. We've got a lot of the reservoirs up. A lot of people are ticked off. The governor's opened up a lot of dams, broken a lot of dams down. You got a lot of areas up there that thrived on tourists and sport fishing that have been wiped out by these moves. So, he played to one group. That could hurt a lot of people. And that's what I meant. You've got a governor who's been relatively absentee trying to run for president. Even the Dems will admit that and have. That's been the talk of, Politico up in the Capitol. You've got the Biden administration and the Trumps getting ready to go at it again, and depending on a lot of variables in that we could have talked about all night long and looked at all the hypotheticals. But I think right now the Dems have got some issues, and this is a fine time for Republicans to go carpe diem and seize the moment and get out there because, and especially our community, we're in the perfect spot, Kevin. I mean, we have so many gun-owning Dems who are what I call centrist voters that we can take a lot of the state back and we can break the supermajority.
And of course, it's the education that's going to raise that as a priority. And that's sort of our main mission here as CRPA, the association. Our main goal is education throughout the community. Hopefully that priority ends up showing with some of these elections. Hurtado still in fourth place in District 22. One that we saw a huge spin on AB 28 last year. So, again, good to see the consequences on that. I am sort of curious, though, Rick, as our board continues to be updated. You talked about the comprehensive nature of the CRPA voter guide. After tonight, a lot of these names disappear.
Correct.
So what actually happens to that voter guide going into the general election?
We will go back. We will report where our wins were. We will double down on some of that information. We'll go back and look at it. And in cases where, say like in the Valadeo Salas race, we probably won't pick someone to win on that one because either one's a winner for us. The same thing might happen in one of the other races. But here, you're seeing it. They're calling it for Shiff and Garvey to go to the election. So they've already broke that. That Shiff and Garvey
Let's get a cheers. That is Katie Porter,
Porter,
somebody who's been making a name for herself.
Bye-bye.
As an extremely anti-Second Amendment legislator in Congress who is now officially at 0% capacity for the rest of her time there, and she is going to have to start over if she wants to continue her political career. That is a huge win for the firearms community. Here's Garvey on the screen right now giving his acceptance speech. So we've already talked a little bit about that. Knowing this now, Rick, what's this look like going into November?
Well, this is going to be an interesting race. It's going to become highly competitive. It will become nasty. You'll probably see some of the most remarkable things. You have Kellyanne Conway that's standing behind him. Kellyanne's been a friend of the CRPA for several years. She's a great political operative. She really knows her stuff. She will be moving out there to make sure things happen. And so this is really good news. He's got a good campaign staff. She's a hard fighter. So Steve Garvey is in a good position, and it shows you too that this is a guy that was just signing baseballs and doing other stuff a couple years ago, and believed in trying to save California, believed in not moving out like a lot of his fellow retirees have done, and stayed here in the fight like I've told people to do. And look, he came from a 0% chance and a joke to many people to tonight. He took out one of the biggest machines, Katie Porter and Barbara Lee.
Can you actually, I mean, this is sort of an off take, but can you actually speak to this at all? We look at it from the citizens' perspective. As far as the political perspective, how is it exactly that you see, or what is the transition for some of these people who have prominent names not in politics? I mean, Donald Trump fits in that category. Herschel Walker fits in that category. Arnold Schwarzenegger fits in that category. Ronald Reagan fit in that category. As far as the politics are concerned, how is it that that transition ends up being a little less seamless? Is it strictly name recognition?
Yeah, I think name recognition is one of the things that helps with that. But I also think that it's going to mean with the people. One of the things that Garvey's done very effectively in this race, as an example, is he's went and met with people one-on-one. He's got down the groups. He hasn't done the cherry picking things that Shiff and Lee and Porter did of just relying on social media and everything. That has a place within the electorate. But, the late, great Tip O'Neill, who was from the Reagan era, said all politics are local. And it seems like a lot of our politicians have forgotten that. And so that's very, very important. We're also looking at some of the DA races. Gascon is still holding in, but he hasn't got to even third or a quarter of the vote. It's like 23%. So as you're looking at some of those races, this isn't looking good, with that percentage. He's not got the, what I would call the approval. So, while Gascon's a really well-known name, both locally and nationwide, when he fares this bad in a primary, yeah.
And what's the history on Gascon?
Well, Gascon's a Soros-backed district attorney. He is the guy that's wanted to release everybody back, and that's part of what's turning the California electorate. And here's what's going to be fun. Gascon staying in the DA race is going to keep that topic front and center, which is going to help other races win. Because all you have to say is, I don't like Gascon. I'm going to do the opposite of what Gascon's going to do. And all those people who are anti-Gascon become your voters and your constituents.
So, I mean, this is all well and good as far as elections are concerned. Can you talk to me a little bit about how district attorneys play into the work that CRPA does?
Yeah, we have some good district attorneys. We have some incredible district attorneys, including some incredible deputy district attorneys. And that's an excellent question because, we have great DAs in LA County. In fact, a couple of them have been strong advocates for CRPA and have stood with us in the Capitol to fight bad legislation. Then you have DAs who may not be your favorite DA, like I don't care for San Diego County's DA, but one of San Diego County's deputy DAs has been one of the strongest advocates for hunters in this state and has went after people that would give us a bad name and has not allowed the legislature to wrap us with what poachers and illegal trappers do and calling them hunters. He has made them criminals, which they should be, and kept hunters on the good side of it. So DAs are incredibly important to the 2A battle here in California because they can set the record straight.
Well, we're going to continue and watch that one as well. Any other DAs races that are prominent to you, or is it really just LA that we should be watching?
Well, LA is one of the ones that stands out on the national level with Soros-backed stuff. There are several others that are important in the state, but we're not following those as closely tonight. We'll follow some of these elections a little bit more closer as we move to November. But some key ones that we wanted to see tonight, we're already seeing some excellent numbers. I'm really happy. One of the ones I know we mentioned in District 2, Teef Gibbs. The last time Kurt just reported, so I was a little distracted. She was down around, I think, 7% in her area, which means she's clearly not going to be in the November runoff. But this was Teef's first time out. She got her feet wet. She built a name up for herself. She's now a former congressional candidate, and she can be at a lot of different things. She'll be with me on Capitol Day, which will be excellent. I'll love having her up there. And that's one of the things. This is another way that we can make our Capitol Day so impressive is we have people that really care and will really get that experience, and she can use that to leverage for votes in the future.
Well, we still got these votes coming in. District 47 is going to be an interesting one. As we get an update on that, we'll let you know. That's the Min-Ba race as well as the Hurtado race. I mean, those are at least the two that weigh on my heart right now. This map looks pretty drawn out. I'm sure that we get some positive correlation to some of the other maps other than U.S. Senate. As far as these acceptance speeches, we saw, if you were watching the national broadcast, you also saw Katie Porter giving her speech. Rick, something that we didn't talk about tonight. This is a little bit of a.
I did want to say one thing before you finish. It is the 9:30 hour. Any of you watching and have stuck with us, if you have any questions, We've got about 30 minutes left in this live stream, and please put them in the chat, and Jacob will feed them to us.
So you got a lot of unprecedented things, and as this board continues to get updated so that we can relay those numbers to you, I wanted to talk about something else that you brought up in personal conversation that I didn't really get a chance to explore with you, really the impact that it could have. First of all, you know, the legislature is one thing. There are other bodies that are government run that we interact with other than legislators. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is one of them. They do a lot of studies. You were mentioning to me that there was a set of white pages that has been created. I think you said something like 300 pages that was collecting data with for a bear plan. Is that correct? Can you speak to that a little bit? Speak to the importance of something like white pages and talk about the unprecedented nature of that and how it's going to have an impact going forward?
Yeah, I would love to. So they're called white papers, and what they are is they're papers that lay out the problems, solutions, and give all the data. What we face a lot of times in Sacramento are people who are making a lot of assertions, citing made-up statistics, and so then we have to go back and fight that. So we have literally went back to fight that as hard as we can, and in fighting that as hard as we can, we started writing the white papers up. White papers have two purposes, Kevin. We can hand those into legislators showing them where they're wrong and refuting the bad information of our opposition. We follow the science, we follow the facts. We don't make stuff up. The other thing we can do is we can hand those to reporters because the media in a lot of respects has become less engaged in doing their own research and more willing to accept whatever someone hands them in a paper, and then they can repeat it, and if it's wrong, they can pass that blame to whoever handed them that paper. Investigative journalists used to go double and triple check their own facts. That seems to be less a plan these days in the media. So we work very hard now to put these white papers together so we can hand them to the journalists. We underline where the data came from. We post it up. So it's a lot more work on our end, but it's designed to kill negative articles. It's also designed to promote better education to the people and to teach them what's really going on. So for example, that white paper had an influence on a couple of government agencies. So bears were being touted to be like maybe 9,000 bears. And now we found out there's 75,000 bears, which means we're well over carrying capacity. And we have a major issue now in maintaining the balance of the ecological system that will allow for hunting, but will also allow for sustainability of various herds of other animals. But we do have a question on the outcome in Senate race, State Senate race 23. So we have Kurt looking that up for us, so we can give you that information here in just a minute. So Kurt's going to get that up for us, and then
Valadares 31%, Mueller 30%, Hamburger 22%.
So Valadares and Kit Mueller look like are going to be the two that will break for the election. Valadares is from the which party? Huh? Republican Party. And Mueller from the Democrats. So it would be a Republican Democrat. The Republicans slightly ahead, but it looks like that's going to break to those two in State Senate District 23.
42%.
And that's with 42% of the vote in.
Well, as we continue to see updates with these, we're going to relay them to you guys as soon as we get them updated on our board here. But Rick, back to this, you know, with all the work that goes into putting together something like that as expansive as 300 pages, what do you look to get out of it? Is that something that you lobbied the Department of Fish and Wildlife with? And what do you expect to see from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It creates the knowledge base for us to be able to beat bad legislation. Like, I can give a simple bill that is right now looks like it could be a gun and amend that they're talking about. So it goes after some that we watch, which are sporting dogs. And to make this really simple, on the sporting dog bill, what they're talking about is that anybody that breeds and has more than 10 dogs becomes a commercial breeder. The state can tax them, the state can remove them, the state can do all this stuff. Okay, so, but a lot of people out there are like, wow, 10 dogs, that's a lot of dogs. Okay, stop. Hold the door. Okay. in Orange County where I live, I'm not allowed more than 3 dogs, with one exception, if I have a litter of puppies, which during the lifespan of the 2 dogs I have on my home, that's happened twice. So at 2 times, I did have 10 dogs on the campus because the average litter of a Labrador Retriever is, if you ask any lab breeder, they will tell you 8. So when you have an average size litter, you immediately have 10 dogs. Right. I'm not a commercial breeder. I bred the dogs twice. The puppies were placed in homes of people who knew the dogs, the mom and dad, beforehand. I didn't have to advertise. They were pretty much sold before they were ever conceived, let alone born. And yeah, and I didn't make any money off of it because the money I got paid basically recouped the cost of having a litter. Yeah, right. So, you know, that's a ridiculous bill. It's a ridiculous waste of taxpayers' money. But why are they doing it? Well, it's a backdoor to end hunting dogs in California. And by ending hunting dogs in California, then they can end hunting, then they can go after your firearms that way. So, you know, we have to watch all those things. And that's why looking at the particulars of where people sit, what they do, the things that they push, not just listening to like a Katie Porter that's up there speaking about her primary loss and what she's saying. You know, she tries to sell herself one way, but if you actually know the woman, actually know what she does on a daily basis, there's the virtual Katie Porter and there's the real Katie Porter. And our job is as owners of this country, because that's what citizens are, we need to flesh out our employees, which is what politicians are. And then we need to be able to say, yeah, no, we're not going to play these games. There's the door. And tonight, Katie Porter got showed the door.
Well, do you see
as did Melissa Hurtado.
Well, at least we are expecting that. So, guys, we've kind of hit a little bit of a stagnant zone with the ballots coming in. We do have the one race that has been called, that is Shiff and Garvey over Porter and Lee. This is a huge victory for the Second Amendment community, just seeing somebody like Katie Porter, who has become a prominent anti-Second Amendment voice in Congress, no longer in this race. We're going to continue following these along as these updates come in. We're going to let you know, especially with future videos. Rick, we're gonna have to have some videos come out and show people how they can follow along with our voter guide as these races come to a close.
We'll stick with you guys till probably 10 minutes after 10, then cut this live stream. That will give us a chance to look at what the 10 o'clock poll update is, to update everybody before we say goodnight for the evening. But
sure. Yeah, absolutely. We are going to continue and follow, but it doesn't end here. You know, the live stream may end. The ballots are going to continue and be counted. You can be sure that CRPA is going to be looking to update its members with the way these elections roll out and what the strategy is going to be and what it's going to look like going into November at the general election. But a huge win with Katie Porter no longer being in there. Any surprises with any of these percentage totals that you see so far?
Yeah, there was one in 47. I honestly thought Weiss had a chance of beating Min out, and it doesn't look like that with 46%. I'm waiting to see what happens at the 10 o'clock hour. I do also want to do a shout out to the people watching with us right now. At this point, if you weren't with us earlier, because we can't tell who comes and who goes in these things, we do have a Capitol Day coming up in the Capitol. If you're interested, please reach out to us at contact@crpa.org. That's contact@crpa.org, and put in the subject line, I want to go to Capitol Day, and then we will reach out to you to help facilitate that and talk to you about it and get you up there helping us lobby in the Capitol and learn what that's like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess while we're waiting for some of these vote tallies to come in, overall perspective, you know, I kind of, you know, my first year with CRPA, I believe was 2016. So what happened legislatively in 2016? I think it was something called that later got referred to as Gunmageddon.
Yeah, Prop 63.
With Prop 63 coming. And I guess another example of what you were talking about earlier with Democrat legislators kind of going after each other, trying to make sure that it was their bill that got adopted.
Yeah, that was Brown and Senate Pro Tem Kevin De Leon versus Gavin Newsom, who was the lieutenant governor, and they had a big match. And so we had Gunmageddon with Kevin DeLeon and Jerry Brown versus Prop 63. Newsom sold Prop 63 as safety for all. A lot of voters, including gun voters, didn't read it, didn't listen to us, and said, no, it's about safety for all. Why wouldn't I be for that? Only to find out that they had voted away magazines and ammunition and a whole bunch of stuff and went, wait, what just happened? Yeah, well, thanks, guys and gals, for voting that way. So,
well, I get the reason why I reference that is because that kind of serves as a baseline for me. You know, that is an extreme. I understand that's an extreme, but it does serve as a baseline. Since then, I personally haven't experienced any legislative session that was necessarily as bad as that for the firearms community. How does the 2024 legislation and the way that it's...
I would say last year was incredibly brutal with Senate Bill 2 going across the line. We had over 100 bills last year at one point that we were facing off. Right now, we don't have as many bills, so it's very easy for our community to say, it's not as bad. But it is in some ways worse because we have about half the bills, but we also have half the time to fight it in because of Super Tuesday elections, cut away almost all of January, all of February, and half of March. So the first 10 weeks of battle were removed from us, which means those bills will stay in the House of Origin a very small amount of time before they get shifted into the other house,
right,
which makes it harder.
However, each time they do get shifted, I mean, the hope, at least for this anti-Second Amendment legislation, is that it dies here and now.
Right.
But with every shift, there is an opportunity to advocate, right? And we have talked about the one-click politics that CRPA has started engaging in. We engaged with it last year, I think with a couple months left in the legislative session. We're going to be working with it all legislative session long in 2024. We're going to hope to get as many emails of opposition letters sent to these legislators as possible to let them know that their constituents do not approve of this sort of legislation. But I am curious, you know, you talk about like a zombie bill, you know, where it's kind of the same bill. It's an excise tax for 11% on the firearms community for all firearms parts, and ammunition. Them running that bill year after year after year, which is why you call it a zombie.
We've had the same thing. Blake Spear trying to run the insurance bills, and she keeps
I was
changing them.
I was actually going somewhere different. So you have that, which you could call a zombie bill that keeps coming back to life. This year, and tell me how common this is, you know, you have multiple bills basically saying the same thing. How is it that happens? Is that a common thing?
No, it's not common, but what they're trying to do is, because of the Bruin test of, you know, history, text, tradition, they're trying to cut it little pieces, and so it's death by 1,000 cuts. So it's like, oh, we might block this one on insurance, but can you block this one? And if you noticed, their newest twist now is basically to turn your insurance agent into the person that becomes the unofficial inspector of the legislator to find out where your firearms are stored and how that works. So it's some really interesting ways. One could maybe make the argument they're trying to deputize insurance agents. And the fact is, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you could have some insurance agents rebelling against that, and you could have others embracing that much farther than anybody ever wanted to have happen, which equals lawsuits. And, you know, the government doesn't care when it causes a lawsuit because they're already getting paid to be there.
Well, right, and it is that sense of monopoly money, which, you know, we started talking about, and then we got shifted because we
should have talked about. Like, this is a state that had a $100 billion surplus, and now depending on who you talk, that's somewhere between a $72 and $85 billion deficit in 2 years.
Makes my blood boil, I'll tell you that. But I mean, as far as your experience in the Capitol, a lot of these legislators, they know that organizations like CRPA are going to bring forth lawsuits. And why do they know that? Because you're in there telling them what you're doing is unconstitutional, and we sort of have a reputation for filing lawsuits on things that are unconstitutional.
And winning.
Right.
And winning. So
they know that this is going to happen. Do they feel like they're just playing with monopoly money up there?
No, I mean, let's be honest. So like your Portantino, you pass a bill 4 years ago. So that bill, like Duncan, let's take Duncan, like you said, 2016. Duncan comes into play. It's 2024, Kevin. It's 8 years later that now it's going in front of the Supreme Court. 8 years later. half of the people that were in office are no longer in office. They don't
Right.
care. And that's how they look at it. That can is going to be paid for down the road. I don't have to deal with it. Bye.
Sure, and I guess that makes sense, but you know, there has to be some sense. I don't want to say guilt. There has to be some sort of conscience here that these people are bypassing when they're doing this. Just understanding that they have zero personal consequences for costing the California people what they end up costing them.
Hold on for a sec. Kurt, I know you just updated 47. Could you update the other ones?
No change yet.
Okay, so there's no changes. In 47, which is the Baugh Min race, it's a neck and neck with Baugh and Min, 29.9% for Baugh with 47% of the vote in, Min 29.4%, so that's going to go all night. But Weiss is falling behind at 21.1 now, and Ucrapina is falling back to 11. So obviously Max is not going to be in the final showdown. It doesn't look like Joanna Weiss is going to be able to recoup that. So it does look like it's going to be a Baugh Min. I feel comfortable saying that. Valadeo and Salas, if they continue to hold on, we'll again check at the 10 o'clock hour coming up here in 10 minutes. We can see on the national thing, Shiff is talking about how wonderful, how great it is. He's probably going to now no longer focus on Porter and Lee, and now it's going to be the sheer attack between him and Garvey. And so that's going to become back and forth. But now we're looking at, you know, who's going to replace them in their districts. Can we just check, I think, what is Portantino up at in Schiff's old district? So the Schiff's district is a very heavily Democratic district. So Kurt's grabbing those numbers for us really quick.
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, go ahead and grab that. Kevin Kiley at 51% of the vote, with Morse at 46% of the vote. Pretty likely that District 3 is going to see those two go to the general election.
And Kiley will carry it.
And what you're talking also is that Baugh versus Min, pretty likely going to go to the general election.
Yeah.
Steele, with 36% of the vote in, Steele's at 51%. The other four, under 20% each of them. So at the very least, that is also a win. You see Steele going to the general. The Shiff Garvey has already been called. And again, guys, two huge wins.
Wait, we have breaking news. Go ahead. Which district is that?
House District 30, Laura Friedman, 28%, Alex Balakian, 19%, Anthony Portantino, 15%.
So, folks, this is incredible
Anthony
news
Portantino
tonight.
is in third place.
Yes, this is incredible news. So, Anthony Portantino, the worst senator in this state for Second Amendment, who was trying to take over Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff had endorsed Portantino. Portantino was considered the shoo-in for this position. He's been running around, showing off, talking about how, you know, he was going to be in Adam Schiff's position and carry his anti-2A politics to the nation's capital. And currently he has what percentage, Kurt?
15%.
15%. And the next candidates up have
28 and 19.
28 and 19. And with how much the percentage in?
47%.
With 47% of the vote in.
47% of the vote in. So there is a couple points that he could potentially make up to get second place.
Right.
But if he does not crack that, he's in the
done.
same position as Katie Porter. He's in
Correct.
the same position as Melissa Hurtado.
Correct.
And his political career is really starting over again from ground zero.
And this could be a video that we have in the next couple of days as we get the final numbers of all the anti-2A people that nah. Hey, bye-bye.
Goodbye. So I guess, you know, as we're closing this out, as some of these numbers continue to kind of remain stagnant, Rick, let's just go, you know, we have some prominent districts here. Let's just go over some of these wins. So like we just said, Melissa Hurtado, who was one of the last votes to vote yes on Assembly Bill 28.
She was one of the first votes to broke for 28.
Okay.
She was one of the leading speeches on 28 after she told our community she wouldn't do that to us. And she did, and she led the tide against us. And that's where we're at right now. And it's really interesting for us to be able to see because this is becoming a very, very strong position for us to be able to look at where things are going.
It is good to see consequences for people who make poor decisions. Hurtado kind of going against the word there. Ends up coming, looking like she's going to come in at 4th for District 22. The Steele race at District 45 is a win for the firearms community. Steele is Pro 2A.
But we just had a flip. So in 20, which was Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House's race, we had a tie running earlier tonight when we reported Mike Bedreau, the sheriff of that county, going up against Vince Fong. And if you remember, they were neck and neck.
Right.
And now with what percentage reporting?
Percentage reporting is.
This is breaking. We just got this update. With 42% of the vote counted, Fong is now at 37, Wood at 24, and Bedreau is now at 22, meaning that Mike Bedreau, if this holds, and he can't catch up and surpass Wood, would no longer be in. And that would cause us now to go all in for Fong, because Wood would not be our candidate. Bedreau's people would go over there, which should give Fong sufficient to win.
Right.
But this is why, this is going to change some of these numbers and then how we come out with our endorsements.
So, you would obviously rather see two very pro Second Amendment people
Correct.
going into the general election in November. That has sort of switched. Boudreaux has fallen down to 3rd. Kevin Kiley, however, in District 3 is continuing to hold strong at 51%. Likely see him there. Like I was saying before that came in, Steele at 51%. Everybody else below. Seeing her in the general election in November is definitely going to be a good thing. I gotta maybe assume that there could be room for improvement or demotion with the District 47 with Baugh and Min, but it kind of looks like they're pulling away, both of them at 29% with 47% of the vote in. Any other final thoughts, Rick? I guess while we've gone over a lot of the positives, and guys, a huge positive. Katie Porter, no longer in. She's not going to November. Melissa Hurtado looks like she is not going to go in.
They just called
the Kevin Kiley race at so Kiley and Morse. Kevin Kiley going to November for the general election. But we do have some prominent names that are not going to be shown in November that are no friends to the Second Amendment community. We're going to continue and follow along. Any final thoughts throughout the night, Rick?
Yeah, I think tonight for a lot of us, it's a primary night. I do want to highlight we will be back doing this in November, and that one will be a late night program. We will probably be going 6 to 8 hours, probably till well past midnight. So on that one, we're going to create some things that we learned from tonight. We're not going to take breaks. You will see us with food and water in front of us because we're going to have to go that way. We may focus on one or more of us, that the other one has to go stretch their legs or something during that time period. But we're gonna advance how we do this. We've learned some things. We thank you for being with us tonight. As always, we want you to remember always to be safe, shoot straight, and fight back for your rights. And tonight, that's what this whole program's been about, is fighting back for those rights.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here, giving us the insight. I look forward to doing that with you in November. Only growth from here, not just for us at CRPA, but for the firearms community and its representation in government coming out of 2024. Guys, it doesn't end here. Obviously, there is a whole lot of counting that still needs to be done. Some of these races might change a little bit. Some of them may not. We are going to continue and stick with you by any means of communication that we can. So pay attention to your emails. Pay attention to videos that come out in the future. We will definitely be referencing a lot of these races and what we are looking forward to coming into the general election in November. I want to thank you guys for being on this journey with us and hanging out. Looking forward to do it again, and we'll see you on the next one.